Chapter 858. Yes, senior sister. Peacock and Chen Chen are outside the Refining Heart Cave, waiting for the other disciples to come out. Just now, I have already checked. Their mortal mantra has already reached an inconceivable height. I am ashamed to say that even I have never cultivated to their current level. Ah, I'm ashamed. Junior sister Jing Fan, you're thinking too much. Everyone has their own destiny. Junior sister just hasn't had the right time yet, so it's nothing. Besides, there's an old saying, the pupil surpasses the master. If the disciples aren't as good as the masters, then how can our fragrant religion be passed down from generation to generation and prosper? Jing Fan's face turned cold, she bowed and said, "Thank you for your warning, senior sister. I'll remember it." Well, since the two of them have passed the primary selection, and the mortal heart technique has reached great success, this time's primary selection can be said to be perfect, and, the matter of the inheritance can be considered settled. The hierarch's laughter was loud and clear. Congratulations, hierarch, an old woman next to her said. In the past, we had to first worry about the primary selection, then worry about the inheritance. Today, these two children have really done well. They actually managed to overcome all the obstacles in the Refining Heart Cave. It's really the blessing of the 10,000 years of fragrant religion's ancestors. Another masked elder also smiled. Hierarch, it can be seen that the time for our fragrant religion to prosper has arrived. The hierarch laughed and waved her hand. Although it's a joyous occasion, and we can also inherit our immortal heart technique, it's still too early to say that it will prosper. Then she looked outside the palace, looking at the dark night. She said with some melancholy, in the past 10,000 years, the world has changed greatly. The immortal heart technique's world yuan qi has greatly decreased. Although our fragrant religion is blessed by the heavens, with the immortal heart technique's restrictions and formations, it's already difficult to retain a bit of world yuan qi on the 19 peaks. What's more, the aroma sect has an inheritance palace, and the secret rooms inside guarantee that each generation will have one or two disciples who practice the immortal Tao arts. Although the immortal Tao arts can't be used often, it's still an inheritance, and can guarantee that the aroma sect won't be wiped out in the Jianghu. Yes, the immortal heart technique is too powerful. No matter how high your martial arts are, it's still reduced in front of the immortal heart technique. Perhaps this is the main reason why our fragrant religion has been able to stand for 10,000 years. But the heart technique's room has a limited amount of primordial stones. I don't know how long it can last. Even this sect protecting grand formation, to be honest, I'm not sure about it. The heart technique's appearance, Jianghu is. This is the prophecy of an immortal Tao senior. Now that the great sect protecting formation is becoming more and more stable, even the opening time has gradually become fixed. Although it is not the same as before, it can be considered normal. This concerns the survival of our fragrant religion. Everything is important. The hierarch said solemnly, these are troubled times. Those rascals who sneaked into our fragrant religion have been making a lot of moves recently. If it weren't for the fact that we have to find the source and that the inheritance is more important, we would have eliminated them long ago. After thinking for a while, the hierarch said, what's the situation in the ruins of Huan? An elder bowed and said, Hierarch, according to the disciple guarding the place, there were some movements in the ruins of Huan on the day of the heavenly thunder, but he can't be sure that the heavenly thunder has something to do with the ruins of Huan. How would he know? The hierarch sneered, what heavenly thunder? It's clearly an attack from a Dharma artifact. The attack was so sharp that even the peak protecting formation couldn't block it. What else could it be other than that thing in the ruins of Huan? Could it be that someone from the immortal path sneaked into our fragrant religion and tried to kill a weak disciple? Hierarch, you're right. Only an attack from that thing could have such power. It's just that this thing has been in the ruins of Huan for so many years without any movements. We don't even know what that thing is or what it looks like. How could it suddenly? The hierarch waved his hand and said worriedly, isn't this what I'm worried about? It's because of that thing's inexplicable problems that we're rushing the direct selection to confirm the inheritance. No matter what happens, you and I won't become sinners of the fragrant religion. Hierarch, you're wise. All the elders bowed and saluted. The elders have also worked hard. After a few hours, the direct selection will end. You should also let the hall masters of the various halls return and let them rest for a few days. Then, we can discuss how to eliminate the rascals who have sneaked into the cult and the matter of entering Huansu. Yes, Hierarch. Everyone was respectful. Early in the morning, the rising sun broke through the clouds. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly opened her eyes in the secluded little house. At the same time, in front of the refining heart cave at the western foot of Lingxiang Peak, there was another female disciple in a purple palace dress beside Peacock and Chen Chen. The three of them were sitting cross-legged. When they saw the sunlight, they immediately stood up from the ground. There was a soft clang and the mysterious pattern that had been spinning for 24 hours stopped. Then, like rolling clouds, it surged toward the pitch-black cave entrance. When the light and pattern were about to disappear, there was a clear humph sound. Dozens of light threads shot out from the pitch-black cave and nailed themselves around Peacock and the others. Chen Chen and the others seemed to have been warned and did not move. In a few breaths, the dozens of disciples who had entered the cave earlier suddenly appeared where they were standing. However, at this time, they were in different forms. The moment the disciples of Mo Xian Palace appeared in front of the refining heart cave, the light threads on their bodies were retracted. The mysterious pattern began to slowly spin around the cave entrance. The rotation seemed slow but was actually very fast. In just a moment, the cave entrance was sealed. With a "pa" sound, a black shadow shot out from the sealed cave entrance. The hierarch, who had been standing at the side, waved his hand. The black shadow that was about to fly away immediately changed direction and flew directly into the hierarch's hand. At this time, at the cave entrance, a few illusory shadows flashed and a stone tablet appeared. It had returned to its original state of not being opened yesterday. Looking at the dozens of female disciples of Mo Xian Palace who were pushed out of the illusion array, they were all lying on the ground in different postures. Their expressions were very strange. Some were happy, some were sad, some were angry, some were as calm as water, some had their almond eyes wide open. Looking at their clothes, most of them were in a mess. Some were bare-chested, some were flirtatious, and some were even half undressed. In short, there was no one to speak of. Of course, there were also a few female disciples who were sitting cross-legged. However, the expressions on their faces were also very varied. It was as if they were fighting against their own inner demons. Peacock, Chen Chen, and the disciple who passed the official selection were all flushed under their veils as they thought of all their experiences. On the other hand, the sect leader and a few elders were calm. They methodically walked into the crowd of disciples and sealed their acupuncture points. After that, they tidied up everyone's clothes. Then, they clapped their hands and dozens of other female disciples came in a line from afar. They brought the disciples who had passed the direct selection out. After everything was tidied up, Jing Yi came in front of Peacock and the others. Looking at the third disciple, she was surprised. "Yu Yan, I didn't expect. You also passed the official selection." "Not bad, not bad." The female disciple lowered her head and said shyly, "Thank you, Hierarch, for your praise. It's all because of Master's teachings. Xuezhen has always been in charge of the affairs of the labor camp. I know that. I didn't expect her to have taught such a good disciple." Then, as if she thought of something, she asked, "Yu Yan, you. In the refining heart cave, the heart technique you practiced. Did it make any progress?" Yu Yan's face was blank. "No, Hierarch. I heard Master say that the refining heart cave is a trial of the mind. How could it have any effect on the heart technique?" Then, she thought of something and turned her head to look at Peacock and Chen Chen. Jing Yi clapped her hands and said, "Good. No matter what, this year's official selection greatly exceeded our expectations. There were actually 3 disciples who stood out. This can be considered as making up for the lack of results of the official selection for the past 50 years. Alright, Peacock, Chen Chen, Yu Yan, you all go back and rest. In a few days, go to the inheritance palace and carry out the inheritance ceremony. Let's see which one of you can inherit my fragrance sect's legacy. Yes, we will follow Hierarch's orders. The three of them bowed. Below the Lingxiang Peak, in the Firely Hall, a woman in palace attire sat high up on the throne. She smiled at the woman beside her who was also masked. Junior Sister Een, these few days of the official selection have been hard on you. Hierarch has ordered you to rest for a few more days. The woman shook her head and said, "It's nothing. The official selection is related to the inheritance of our fragrance sect. Who wouldn't do their best? Fortunately, Mo Xian Palace has 3 disciples who passed the official selection. This is better than the previous 10 years of hard work. Isn't that right? Elder Jing Fan has 2 disciples all of a sudden, and even Abbess Xuezhen has a disciple. They both have good lives. Just look at my good-for-nothing disciples. If they were half as good as them, I would be satisfied." Senior Sister Hua, you can't say that. Every disciple has their own characteristics. They can't be lumped together. Hall Master Hua waved her hand. "Forget it, Junior Sister Een. Don't say it. I have heard you say this for decades. You have 7 good disciples, especially the youngest, Zhang Pinger. TSK, she is so considerate to you. She even rushed to the Yulon Grand Canyon for your illness. How can I not be envious?" Speaking of this, she suddenly thought of something and said, "Oh, right. I just heard from the disciples patrolling the mountain that your 3rd disciple, Mei Sujin, used our Firely Hall's Lai Chui Valley yesterday. It seems that she was testing the martial arts of some disciple. That Lai Chui Valley is also known as the Ghost Valley. Go back and ask, why did she use that place?" Vice Hall Master Yin's expression changed greatly. She quickly got up and said, "Understood, Senior Sister. I will immediately go back and investigate. I will report back to you." Chapter 859. Lihua Temple, in the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Vice Temple Master Een sat with a veil on her face. She looked at the disciple in front of her and asked in a deep voice, "Suying, why do you want to use Li Chui Valley? Tell me." Mei Suying raised her head to look at her master, then looked at the expressionless eldest senior sister. She smiled and said, "It's nothing, master. It's just that the day before you went to Mo Xian Palace, eldest senior sister told me to do something." Vice Temple Master Een frowned and turned to ask, "Zhuiqi, why did you call Suying?" "Me?" Eldest senior sister Han Zhuiqi obviously didn't expect her to be involved. She was stunned and looked at Mei Suying strangely. When Mei Suying saw this, she immediately smiled and said, "Eldest senior sister, did you forget? Didn't you say a few days ago that Master told you to do something? You wanted to go to Mo Xian Palace with Master, but you were afraid that 7th junior sister would be anxious, so you told me?" Han Zhuiqi slapped her forehead and said, "That's right, Master. Didn't you tell me to test the martial arts of that alchemy disciple called Xiaoyao? This disciple was recommended by 7th junior sister and can be considered Master's savior. Disciple is going to Mo Xian Palace with Master. I was afraid that Ping would be anxious, so I chatted with 3rd junior sister. If Ping couldn't find us, I would let 3rd junior sister test for me. However, she immediately understood and turned pale with fright. 3rd junior sister, you wouldn't let this disciple go to Ghost Valley, would you?" "Why wouldn't I? He's going to Ghost Valley." Vice Temple Master Een coldly snorted and said, "Even the Temple Master knows." "Temple Master knows?" Mei Suying was also stunned. She immediately smiled and said, "Master, eldest senior sister, I'm just being kind. You see, no one has entered Li Chui Valley for a long time. There must be mountains of herbs inside. Letting Ren Xiaoyao take advantage of the opportunity to go in and pick some, isn't it the best of both worlds? Furthermore, Sir Cult Leader has personally said that a martial arts test is a must. Disciple has thought for a long time but still could not think of any test that fits Sir Cult Leader's taste. I only feel that testing martial arts in this Lai Chui Valley can show Sir Cult Leader's benevolence. Deputy Hall Master Yin didn't seem to be interested in asking so many questions. He waved his hand and said, "What are the results of the test? Did that Ren Xiaoyao come out alive?" Mei Suying shook her head slightly. "Disciple waited for 8 hours but didn't see any movement, so I came back first. 7th junior sister and 6th junior sister are standing guard over there. This disciple doesn't know the exact outcome. However, there are very few people in Lichui Valley who can last for 6 hours. This disciple feels that." Hearing this, Vice Hall Master Yin couldn't help but speak harshly, "You. Mei Sujin, don't you think you've gone too far?" Seeing that Vice Hall Master Yin was angry, Mei Sujin immediately stood up and bowed. "Disciple knows her wrongs. Master, please punish me." "You." Vice Hall Master Yin smiled bitterly. "No matter what, Ren Xiaoyao is Master's savior. Your 7th junior sister did everything she could to get him to distant fire hall. You, on the other hand, died a few days later. If I had known earlier, why would I have asked Sir Cult Leader for help?" "Master." Disciple also, without waiting for Mei Sujin to finish speaking, a voice came from outside. "Master, eldest senior sister, you're finally back. You have to uphold justice for me." 2 women flew in. Wasn't the one who was shouting in front Zhang Pinger? Vice Hall Master Yin shook his head. "Whoever you say will arrive." This lingering fragrance peak is really strange. As soon as she saw the pavilion, Zhang Pinger threw herself to the ground and cried, "Master, you have to uphold justice for me." 3rd senior sister, she used her position to avenge a private grudge. Mei Sujin was anxious and argued, "Master, don't listen to her nonsense. When did I use my position to avenge a private grudge?" Vice Hall Master Yin glared at her and said angrily, "Shut up." Then, he comforted Zhang Pinger. "Pinger, don't be anxious. Speak slowly." Thus, Zhang Pinger sobbed and told him about how she and Zhang Xiaohua met Mei Sujin that day. Vice Hall Master Yin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He glared at Mei Sujin again and said with a smile, "Your 3rd senior sister was only joking with you. How could you take it seriously? Even if you offended Sujin that day, she wouldn't be so ruthless just because of a few words from Ren Xiaoyao. Just now, your 3rd senior sister had already told Master the whole story. She only wanted to borrow Ren Xiaoyao's luck to pick more herbs. Who would have thought that it would end up like this? So, even if your 3rd senior sister was wrong, it was an unintentional mistake. She didn't really want to take Ren Xiaoyao's life. Sigh, this Ren Xiaoyao was such a good child. It's all my fault. Pinger, I think this child's body is also gone. Make a cenotaph for him. When it's finished, Master will also burn incense for him." Zhang Pinger listened to Master's words. At first, she nodded, then shook her head. When she heard the last few words, she was even more puzzled. She wiped her tears and asked curiously, "Ren Xiaoyao is dead? Master, did 3rd senior sister curse him in front of you again?" "Eh." At this time, not only Vice Hall Master Yin, but Han Zhuiqi and Mei Sujin were also surprised. "Ren Xiaoyao, he's not dead?" Seeing everyone's surprise, Zhang Pinger felt better. She said proudly, "Ren Xiaoyao's martial arts are very good. How could a mere ghost valley take his life? If he's not dead, why are you crying?" Vice Hall Master Yin turned his head and looked at Shui Linglong, who came with Zhang Pinger. "Your 7th junior sister is right." "Yes, Master. I also saw it with my own eyes." Shui Linglong bowed and answered. "Haha, good. Linglong, go and call Ren Xiaoyao here." After Shui Linglong went out, Zhang Pinger took out the ghost face mushroom that Zhang Xiaohua gave her yesterday and said, "Not only did Ren Xiaoyao come out, but he also picked a 500-year-old ghost face mushroom." With a hiss, Vice Hall Master Yin sucked in a breath of cold air. "There's actually a 500-year-old ghost face mushroom." "Yes, Master. Ren Xiaoyao risked his life to pick it. According to him, he almost lost his life. Zhang Ping'er said pitifully, but this still doesn't meet third senior sister's requirement. Third senior sister wants Ren Xiaoyao to pick a 1,000-year-old ghost face mushroom to pass. Wu master, this is the reason why I'm crying. Ridiculous. Vice Hall Master Yin glared at Mei Suying for the third time. Mei Suying's face turned red. Don't cry, Ping'er. Master made the decision to let Ren Xiaoyao pass the Lichui Valley's martial arts test. Zhang Ping'er's face was slightly red, but there was joy in her eyes. She said, "Thank you, Master, for your kindness." What kindness? Ren Xiaoyao has the strength. Of course, he passed. Vice Hall Master Yin said with a smile. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua followed Shui Linglong to the pavilion on the water. Zhang Xiaohua stood at the entrance of the pavilion from afar and greeted everyone. Soon after, Vice Hall Master Yin said, "Ren Xiaoyao, congratulations on passing the martial arts test. You can take off your status as a reserve alchemy disciple. In a while, I will send someone to report to Mo Shuigong. Your waist token will be sent tomorrow. You are now an official alchemy disciple of the Lihua Palace Hall." Zhang Xiaohua was not surprised. He bowed and said, "Thank you, Vice Hall Master, for your support." Vice Hall Master Yin said with a smile, "It's all your credit. You don't have to thank me." I saw that you passed through the Lichui Valley yesterday. It seems like you didn't suffer any injuries. Oh, your lips seem to be injured. Zhang Xiaohua's lips and neck were bitten yesterday. However, his body's self-healing ability was very strong. He recovered more than half of his body in one night. Only the teeth marks on his lips could be faintly seen. If it was a normal day, Vice Hall Master Yin might not know. However, when he heard that Suemo had passed through the Ghost Valley, he couldn't help but look carefully. Zhang Xiaohua touched his lips awkwardly and said, "Yesterday, I accidentally fell down in the Lichui Valley." He. Vice Hall Master Yin didn't pursue the matter. He only said, "Then, tell me about what happened yesterday." Okay. Zhang Xiaohua knew that this moment would come. He had already planned it in his heart. He only told Vice Hall Master Yin about what happened yesterday. What? What did you say? The black fog in the Lichui Valley has dissipated? Vice Hall Master Yin stood up and asked in shock. Zhang Xiaohua did not understand why Vice Hall Master Yin was so nervous. He rubbed his nose and said, "Vice Hall Master, think about it. If the black fog did not dissipate, how could I have the ability to pick the ghost face mushroom at the bottom of the valley?" Good. This can be considered a great contribution. Vice Hall Master Yin turned to Han Zhuiqi and said, "Zhuiqi, quickly go and confirm it. If it's true, immediately report to Mo Shuigong. The disappearance of the ghost fog in the Ghost Valley might be related to the fragrant cult." After Han Zhuiqi took the order and left, Deputy Hall Master Yin asked again, "Ren Xiaoyao, since you didn't encounter the ghost fog at all, there is naturally no danger. But, why didn't you come out immediately after picking up the ghost face mushroom? Instead, you stayed in there until it was dark?" Zhang Xiaohua laughed embarrassedly, reporting to Vice Hall Master, "Senior Mei wanted a 1,000-year-old ghost face mushroom. This is obviously not the ghost face mushroom. I searched the valley 3 times, but it was a waste of time. And what? And the night before yesterday, I heard that there was going to be a test yesterday. I was too excited and did not sleep well. Plus, I was tired from wandering around the Lichui Valley. So, I sat in a place facing the sun and slept, fell asleep. This." Everyone was speechless. What kind of person is this? After a long while, Vice Hall Master Yin finally came to his senses. He clapped his hands and said, "What a lucky person." Then he thought for a moment and said, "However, Ren Xiaoyao, although you are an alchemy disciple of the Lihua Temple, you must strictly follow the rules of the temple. Step by step, I cannot give you too much help." Zhang Xiaohua laughed, "That is natural. I am willing to follow the rules of the Lihua Temple." Good. As an alchemy disciple, you will start by guarding the garden. After you have learned the basics of watering, you can enter the pill room and learn the basic alchemy techniques. Guard the garden. A garden to grow herbs. It seemed that Zhang Xiaohua had always been fated to grow herbs. Chapter 860. The sun was high up in the sky, illuminating the Lingxiang peak. A pair of red-crowned cranes were leisurely strolling by the side of a secluded and flat mountain path. Occasionally, their long beaks would come into contact with each other. Their pure white wings, which were mixed with black spots, would flutter open and close. It was a peaceful scene. Suddenly, there seemed to be some noise. The pair of red-crowned cranes were startled. They spread their wings and flew up. However, just as they flew up, they turned their heads to look. Thinking that it was someone they knew, they circled around and landed on a mountain rock. "Look at you, senior brother. Every time, you purposely scare this pair of cranes. How could that be?" I just wanted to remind them that not everyone in this world is kind. Don't let your guard down just because others are kind. If there comes a day when they are no longer at lingering fragrance peak, won't they be caught and roasted? Two young people, a man and a woman, came out from the corner. The young woman's skin was exceptionally white. Her features were picturesque. Her originally cold face was filled with charm when she smiled. She was Li Huahal's Zhang Pinger. As for the young man, needless to say, he was tall and thin, with small eyes and a flat nose. He was Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Pinger's smile was like a flower as she said, "Everyone says to burn the zither and cook the crane. You are good, roasting it and eating it. You are really, shameless." Zhang Xiaohua still rubbed his nose and said in confusion, "What? Why didn't I notice this good point of mine?" Then, seeing that Zhang Pinger had finished laughing, he said in a serious tone, "Meat is easy to get old if it is cooked. It is better to roast it. It can add flavor and atmosphere. Plus, there is the 100-flower wine. TSK, just thinking about it makes me drool." The two red-crowned cranes quietly looked at the two people who had been walking on this mountain path recently. They were puzzled. One person was always talking with a straight face while the other was always laughing. They were completely unaware that they had become roasted meat in someone's mouth. As the two of them talked, they walked away. Their laughter gradually faded away. But after a while, it was unknown what was so funny, but the sound of silver bells rang out again. At this time, several male disciples came from behind. When they heard the clear and melodious voice in front of them, their faces unconsciously revealed expressions of jealousy, envy, and puzzlement. One of the disciples curled his lips and said, "I don't know how this little brat called Ren Xiaoyao managed to win senior sister Zhang's favor. How could the two of them be so brazen? Everyone has their own preferences. Who knows? Isn't that so? Senior brother Yu from Imo Nong Gong is so wise and mighty. How could he not enter senior sister Zhang's eyes? Not to mention senior martial brother Yu, even I am more handsome than this Ren Xiaoyao, aren't I? Senior sister Zhang didn't even spare me a glance. By the way, did senior martial brother Yu leave the mountain for business? Why haven't I seen him for so long? Wait and see, when senior brother Yu returns, there will definitely be a good show. Isn't that so? Isn't he just a little medicine boy from the Pill Tower Hall? He actually managed to hug senior sister Zhang's thigh. But who is senior sister Zhang? She is the cold beauty of our Fire Palace Hall. She is the person that senior martial brother Yu likes. He actually dares to get involved. Just wait to be taught a lesson." As he spoke, the disciple picked up a small stone from the ground. He didn't use any strength in his hand and directly threw it at the red-crowned crane that was standing beside the mountain rock. The red-crowned crane was obviously used to these people. It wasn't vigilant until the small stone hit its body. Although it didn't hurt, it was still startled and flew away. A few clear and loud cries rang out. The two red-crowned cranes circled a few times. They looked at the crowd with puzzled eyes and spread their wings to fly away. Why did you provoke these red-crowned cranes for no reason? A disciple scolded. The disciple said in a bad mood, I didn't think so before. These red-crowned cranes are similar to that tall and thin Ren Xiaoyao. My heart is indescribably vexed, forget it, let's go. The crowd rushed away noisily. It had been a few days since Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts test. Under the consolation of her master, Zhang Ping'er didn't manage to get any reply from Mei Sujin. After all, Mei Sujin had been entrusted by senior sister and could do it at a cheaper price. Although the Ghost Valley test was a little difficult, according to Zhang Xiaohua, there wasn't any black fog inside. Instead, it became the simplest test of picking herbs. Moreover, Zhang Xiaohua even slept inside and came out. This made everyone speechless. Therefore, they could only conclude with Zhang Xiaohua successfully passing the test and receiving the job of looking after the herb garden. Of course, what happened next was just as Zhang Ping'er wished. Vice Hall Master Yin found a medicinal garden not far from Zhang Ping'er's alchemy room for her. Moreover, this garden was quite a distance away from the other gardens, so it was very quiet. Due to this convenience, Zhang Ping'er would drop by Zhang Xiaohua's little house every morning and call Zhang Xiaohua to walk together. The two's intimacy was witnessed by the distant Fire Palace disciples. How could they not be jealous? They only felt that this Zhang Xiaohua had run into dog shit luck and gained Zhang Ping'er's favor. As they looked around in self-pity, they also hoped that the so-called senior brother Yu would come over and give him a little suffering. Actually, even Zhang Ping'er's heart was a little anxious. Using it to activate the Yuan Qi to nourish the herbs was already the limit of the incense sect. As for clearing the weeds, watering the spring water, and plucking the herbs, it was better to do it by hand. There was a lot of content in the book and the methods used were all different. Zhang Xiaohua had been reading it carefully for the past few days. He already had the primordial stone in his pocket, so of course, he was in a favorable position. He sat under a tree and read the contents of the book. Just as he was about to take out the primordial stone from his pocket, he suddenly heard a few people walking by the side of the herb garden. Zhang Xiaohua naturally turned his head to look and saw a few people walking by and looking at him. One of them said loudly, "Look, isn't that the brat? That gigolo? That guy who lives off a woman, Pui?" He spat on the ground. If senior brother Yu is not here, why didn't senior brother Yen teach him a lesson? The more I look at this brat, the more uncomfortable I feel. You don't know this, but senior sister Zhang is the direct disciple of our Vice Hall Master. With such a big tree, who would be afraid of her? Even senior brother Yen would have to avoid her in the future. Shoo, lower your voice. It won't be good if others hear you. Hee hee, this brat is just a junior now. What can he do to me? Even if he has a meteoric rise in the future, why would he care about what I say today? If I don't say a few words now, it will be difficult for me to say them in the future. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he could only shake his head and look at the sky for no reason. Who knows my heart? On the lingering fragrance peak, in a large hall, below the tall platform, a middle-aged man with a pair of bright eyes was holding a book in his hand. He was reading it attentively. A young disciple rushed in and stood at the entrance of the hall. Reporting to Martial Uncle, this disciple has something to report. The middle-aged man was rather unhappy. He looked away from the book and scolded, "Can't you see that I am busy? If there is nothing important, don't disturb me." The disciple panicked, but he quickly walked forward and whispered a few words into the middle-aged man's ear. "What? How long has it been since third brother returned?" Chapter 861. What? Third brother hasn't returned for a long time? The middle-aged man was taken aback. He waved his hand and said, "Doesn't third brother often stay out late? What's there to be surprised about? If this is an important matter, what else is there that isn't important in your eyes?" Reporting to Martial Uncle. The disciple's face turned red as he whispered, "Martial Uncle, you did go out frequently, but He only went out for 2 days each time. The longest he went out was 3 days. Furthermore, Martial Uncle Yu was usually accompanied by a disciple. Even if his whereabouts were known, it was definitely not like today where there was no news at all. Is that so? The middle-aged man frowned and said unhappily, "This kid doesn't know how to cultivate and is always thinking about crooked things. Why don't you try to persuade him? What has he been up to recently?" The disciple spoke in a low but clear voice about what had happened to Yu Zhuochuan during this period of time. The middle-aged man snorted and said, "She's just a little girl from the distant fire palace. Since when has old Third's taste been so low? Humph, he even almost forced a disciple from the pill repository hall to sell her. What the hell is he doing? Oh, is this disciple related to that girl from the mythical flame hall? By the way, do you think your martial uncle you went to find trouble with that disciple?" The disciple replied respectfully, "This disciple doesn't know. However, that disciple from the pill repository hall is just an ant in my eyes. How could martial uncle you be interested in her? Forget it. Let's wait a few more days. Who doesn't know Yu Zhuochuan's name on Lingering Fragrance Peak? There shouldn't be anything wrong with her." After he finished speaking, the middle-aged man turned his gaze back to the book. That disciple tactfully bowed and left the room. After the disciple left, the middle-aged man looked at the sky for a while. He muttered to himself, "Isn't it obvious? That Yu Lao San must have fallen in love with another disciple. Why would he spend an entire month on a female disciple? It seems that Zhang Pinger is already long enough." Then, he put down the book in his hand, rubbed the space between his eyebrows, and quickly walked out of the hall. Following the corridor in front of the main hall, they arrived at a huge courtyard at the back. This courtyard was extremely spacious and filled with strange flowers and trees. In the middle of the courtyard, there was a triangular pavilion with slanted eaves. There was an old woman dressed in palace attire sitting in the pavilion. The old woman's face was covered with a white veil, making it impossible to see her face clearly. Her snow-white hair was scattered behind her head. There was an incense burner the size of a fist in front of the old woman. A sandalwood stick as thick as a little finger was shooting straight into the air. When the middle-aged man entered the courtyard, he immediately put on a respectful expression and walked forward with light footsteps. Who knew that a voice would ring out, "Mu Jun, what's the matter?" That voice seemed to ring in his ears. When the middle-aged man heard it, a look of surprise appeared on his face. He exerted strength in his legs and soon arrived in front of the pavilion. He said happily, "Master, your cultivation has increased greatly again. I remember that you only noticed it when I was halfway through. Now that I have just entered, you already know. Moreover, listening to your voice, it has traveled so far, yet it still hasn't dissipated. The level of your internal energy, TSK, is far beyond what this disciple can compare to. Alas, I don't know if this disciple can reach your level in this lifetime." The old woman's face was covered with a white veil, making it impossible to see her emotions. However, there was a trace of joy in her voice. "Look at what you are saying. That was a matter of a few years ago. Half a year ago, I could already hear you entering the garden. Did you already know about it? Perhaps this disciple has forgotten." The middle-aged man wasn't nervous at all and smiled. "Mu Jun, it's a pity that you are not a direct female disciple, much less a disciple of Imo Ning Palace. You can forget about reaching this realm in this lifetime." "That's right. This disciple regrets not being born a female. Otherwise, Master wouldn't have been so melancholic all these years." "Melancholic?" The old woman was startled, then she smiled and said, "What are you talking about? Ruijin Palace is where my Xiang Peak's disciples are located. All of them are male disciples, and since I am in charge of Ruijin Palace, I naturally have more male disciples. This is nothing." However, she immediately sighed, "It's just that the girls I taught in Imo Ning Palace are too disappointing. If only their talents were half as good as yours, then they wouldn't have all lost in the direct selection. They even let junior sister Jingfan's 2 disciples enter. Yes, even junior sister Xuezhen's disciple one. Then she waved her hand, forget it, they are all Mo Ning Palace's disciples. This year, we finally have a direct disciple. Our Xian religion's inheritance has been settled, so this old woman can rest assured. Speaking up to here, she suddenly realized something and said, old people like to talk too much. Yes, is there anything important in the palace that doesn't happen? You can deal with the normal matters. Didn't I already hand everything over to you? Of course not. With Master overseeing things here, how could there be anything important? Disciple hasn't seen you in a few days, so I came to see Master. The middle-aged man gently said. The old woman slightly nodded, then she seemed to realize something and said, go do what you need to do. The matters in the palace might be a bit trivial, but don't mind it. Although you aren't a disciple of Mo Ning Palace, as long as I'm here, in a few years, although I can't guarantee the position of Rui Jin Palace's palace master, the position of vice palace master will definitely be yours. The middle-aged man quickly waved his hand and smiled, Master, you're thinking too much. Disciple didn't mean that. Then he paused for a bit and said, Junior brother you hasn't come back for several days. Is there any problem? That little brat. Who knows where he ran off to? The old woman seemed to be a bit helpless. He relied on his good looks and the entire lingering fragrance peak, is unscrupulous. I really can't do anything about him. Even the Lord Religion Head has mentioned this to me many times. Fortunately, this brat knows the severity of things and never provokes the disciples of Mo Ning Palace. Otherwise, as his master, I wouldn't be able to protect him. No, Master is the famous head elder of our lingering fragrance religion. Even the Lord Religion Head has to give way to you. How could there be anything in the religion that would trouble Master? This old woman was the head elder of lingering fragrance religion and the head of Rui Jin Palace. She was the Jinggang Shirtai that Yu Zhuqiuan mentioned before she died. Jinggang Shirtai shook her head. You guys, how could you know how powerful the Lord Religion Head is? Back then, I passed the main selection with the Lord Religion Head, but in the Inheritance Palace, she was one step ahead of me. Her current cultivation is even harder for me to reach. At this point, Jinggang Shirtai was taken aback. She seemed to have thought of something and said unhappily, Shimujuan, is there something wrong? When the middle-aged man called Shimujuan heard this, he immediately smiled and said, Master, I just wanted to ask, did you see the Lord Religion Head again during the main selection? About my matter. Jinggang Shirtai laughed and said, I say, you've been here for half a day and kept talking about this and that. So you're still thinking about that matter? When she finished laughing, she stared at the lingering candles in front of her and sighed. Regarding your matter, I took advantage of the fact that the Lord Religion Head was happy these past few days to sound her out. However, just like before, the Lord Religion Head didn't say no, nor did she say yes. She only talked about it and I couldn't ask further. However, since the Lord Religion Head didn't explicitly reject it, I think there's still some hope. I'm just afraid that the Lord Religion Head will reject it outright. Shimujuan's expression did not change in the slightest. He only said gently, perhaps my request was a little overboard and made things difficult for the Lord Religion Head. Love between a man and a woman is a matter of mutual consent. The Lord Religion Head won't make things difficult for the Lord Religion Head. She probably has other concerns. Let's wait for a while. My eldest disciple has found a female disciple with no foundation. It's not a disgrace to her. What's so hard to say? As long as I'm here, I'll definitely make the decision for you. Shimujuan was overjoyed when he heard this. I'm relieved to hear that, Master. I'll wait for you to bring me good news. Go ahead. Oh right, tell Zhuqiuan to come to me when you see him. I have something to tell him. Yes, Master. I'll send someone to look for him now. Shimujuan walked out happily. The fragrance of the flowers that he breathed in was exceptionally intoxicating. In the secluded herb garden in the distant flame hall, Zhang Xiaohua kept the small booklet. She recalled the technique in her mind and took out a primordial stone from her chest. She used her vital energy to follow the path indicated in the technique and guided the primordial stone out. Chapter 862. What could be in the hot spring? Of course, it was a person. A woman, a white woman. Zhang Xiaohua had just emerged from the ground when he was dazzled by the white thing in front of him. Did I enter an illusion? Zhang Xiaohua pinched his cheeks and rubbed his eyes. The hot spring in front of him was surrounded by mist. A woman with long hair had her back facing him. She was humming an unknown tune as she used her hands to splash the warm spring water on her fair body. Beside the hot spring, Zhang Xiaohua placed his clothes on the mountain rock. There was a light purple palace dress on it. Come here, fly here. Zhang Xiaohua mumbled a few times. The woman did not fly in front of Zhang Xiaohua like in the illusion. Zhang Xiaohua immediately knew that something was wrong. Needless to say, he had bumped into an inner sect disciple bathing. Zhang Xiaohua made a hand seal and was about to escape. At this moment, the female disciple seemed to have heard the movement. She covered her chest with her hands and did not dare to look back. She squatted down in the hot spring and shouted loudly, "Who is it?" Zhang Xiaohua did not dare to answer. He was about to make a hand seal when the voice entered his ears. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and stood there in a daze. He stared at the woman's long black hair and did not say a word. The true qi condensed in his fingers slowly dissipated and scattered between heaven and earth. The female disciple saw that no one answered, but she was still too embarrassed to look back. She shouted angrily, "How dare you? I don't care who you are, get out quickly. I am a disciple of Imo Nong Gong. If you don't leave, I will report to the sect leader and punish you." The more he heard the voice, the more familiar it was. Zhang Xiaohua's body almost trembled. He resisted the urge to rush forward and said with a trembling voice, You are Meng." "Of course I am Meng." "Ah, you know my name." "Good, since you know, why don't you get out quickly?" The woman was even more furious. Hearing the woman's affirmative answer, Zhang Xiaohua was wild with joy. In an instant, she felt as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. Her heart was so excited that it turned cold. Ever since he started cultivating the Carefree Heart Sutra, he had never felt so cold before. Zhang Xiaohua's mouth was a little dry. She licked her lips and said in a hoarse voice, "In the dream. I am Xiaohua." "Zhang Xiaohua, do you still remember?" "Zhang Xiaohua. Xiaohua Gij?" In an instant, the woman was also stunned. Then, she turned around and stood up without hesitation. She looked straight at Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua no longer felt the urgency in his heart. The moment when Meng turned around was really very short, but in Zhang Xiaohua's eyes, it was incomparably long. When Meng turned around, he saw Meng's fair face and her big eyes filled with surprise and joy. Especially the little beauty mark at the corner of her mouth. In Zhang Xiaohua's eyes, it was reflected in his heart. Just like how Peacock saw Zhang Xiaohua, Meng's face was magnified in Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. It was incomparably clear and filled his entire heart. It was as if at this moment, in this world, there was only Meng. Only Meng's dark eyes looked at Zhang Xiaohua. Then, he met Nie Qianyu on the way back to Pingyang City. Then, he knew that the Misty School had been annihilated. Then, he received the bad news of Zhang Xiaohu's disappearance. Then, he escorted Nie Qianyu back to Rejuvenation Valley. And because he saved Nie Qianyu, Valley Head Nie sent him to the incense cult to find Zhang Xiaohu. In the incense cult, he first went to Tianmu Peak. Then, he went to the Valley of Orchids and met Zhang Xiaohu in the Valley of Orchids. Then, he was sent to Shixin Peak. After a few months there, he had the opportunity to come to Lingering Fragrance Peak because he saved Zhang Pinger. It was also because he came to Lingering Fragrance Peak and Fire Leaving Hall that he had the chance to take care of the herb garden. Then, He had the chance to coincidentally find this small cave with a hot spring. And in this strange cave, the world was so big, but in this small cave, he saw the dream that he had yearned for day and night. It was a dream that he could never forget. Zhang Xiaohua thought that he came to the incense cult to find Zhang Xiaohu. But Zhang Xiaohu was living a comfortable life and did not need him to worry at all. Now, it seemed that everything that Zhang Xiaohua had done, was for one purpose, to find the lover of his heart, Meng. Everything that Zhang Xiaohua thought of in that moment seemed to be pulled by an invisible hand, bringing him step by step to the front of his dream. This hand was fate. It was karma. It was a long-cherished wish. Suddenly, in the way of heaven that Zhang Xiaohua comprehended, the way of karma that had just revealed its outline began to change with a rumbling sound. Just like Zhang Xiaohua in the illusion array, when everything stopped, Zhang Xiaohua clearly saw that the way of karma had turned into a huge palm. That palm stood in the way of heaven in the dazzling starry sky, and it was making a complicated and unusual gesture. Everything that Zhang Xiaohua thought happened in the blink of an eye. Before Zhang Xiaohua could find the blurriness in Meng's eyes, he heard Meng scolding, "What are you looking at? Why don't you go out first?" In all honesty, although Meng was facing Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were only looking at Meng's face that he could not forget for many years. How could he have the leisure to look at other things? Besides, Meng was like a fairy in Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. How could he bear to use his eyes to blaspheme the goddess in his heart? It was when he heard Meng's scolding that Zhang Xiaohua immediately woke up. He immediately closed his eyes, turned around, and walked out step by step. He did not think about releasing his divine sense at all. Standing at the entrance of the small cave, Zhang Xiaohua's mood was difficult to calm down. His eyes looked at the many medicinal fields at the foot of the mountain, and then looked at the countless beautiful flowers on the mountainside. Even the dazzling sunlight and fierce mountain wind were twice as lovely at this time. Zhang Xiaohua almost wanted to embrace this world. What a happy life! After a short while, Meng came out wearing the correct palace clothes. Her pitch-black hair was not completely dry, and there were droplets of water dripping on her clothes. Zhang Xiaohua saw the hairpin on her wet hair. It was the same hairpin that he had in his money pouch. Then, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and looked at Meng's flushed face. There was a faint trace of surprise in her eyes. After looking for a long time, Zhang Xiaohua whispered, "Meng, you have grown up. You are a little different from before." Yes, a few days ago, Zhang Xiaohua saw Meng in the illusion. She was indeed a little different from now. Meng laughed out loud, "We have not seen each other for 5 years. How can I not change? But you, brother Xiaohua, you have not changed at all. Oh, your voice has changed. It is much deeper than before." Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that other than his mother, Meng was the second person to recognize him at first glance. Even if his voice had changed. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "But, Meng, your voice has not changed at all. If I did not hear your voice, I would have been scared away." Meng's face turned even redder and said shyly, "Your voice has changed. If I did not see your face, would have killed you to silence you. Murder." Zhang Xiaohua did not say the last word. Meng smiled and asked, "Xiaohua, why did you come to the fragrant religion? I remember that when I saw you, you seemed to be a person from some place. You have no connection with the fragrant religion. I followed my master to the lingering fragrance peak. You can't be a disciple of the fragrant religion." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he immediately asked, "That's right, where is the Shirtai? I heard that a Shirtai passed away at the lingering fragrance peak. Could it be?" Meng's eyes turned red and she said sorrowfully, "Yes, it was my master, she was an elder of the fragrant religion. But she was suddenly murdered by someone." Zhang Xiaohua was filled with hatred and said, "Do you know who did it?" When master left, his face was very peaceful. According to the hierarch, it should be someone close to him or someone he was familiar with who did it. However, until now, we have not found any clues. We can't find the real culprit. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and raised his head to look at the towering lingering fragrance peak. He originally did not have a good impression of the fragrant religion. He felt that the fragrant religion was his enemy for destroying the Misty School. But when he looked at the Shishine Peak, he saw that the Misty School's disciples were all fine. They did not suffer any torture after coming to the fragrant religion. Unconsciously, his hatred for the fragrant religion lessened. He came to the lingering fragrance peak with malice and wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to uproot the fragrant religion. But now, he knew that the Shirtai who saved his life in the past was an elder of the lingering fragrance peak. In the end, he owed the fragrant religion a debt of gratitude. Even if he remembered this debt of gratitude to the Shirtai, he could not bring himself to destroy the Shirtai's sect. Forget it. Perhaps the grudge between the fragrant religion and the Misty School can only be resolved by the two of them. Zhang Xiaohua had already made up his mind. However, he glanced at the dream, then at the floating clouds in the sky, and said, "Nanjing Xian is my savior. She was killed by someone, making it impossible for me to repay her kindness. I swear that I will find the real culprit who killed Nanjing Xian and kill him with one sword. If I can't do it, then I am willing to suffer the pain of 10,000 arrows piercing my heart." Xiaohua, Meng's small hand covered Zhang Xiaohua's mouth and said, "Master's matter will be investigated by the lingering fragrance peak's disciples. Don't force yourself to be burdened." Meng's small hand felt the warmth of Zhang Xiaohua's mouth and nose. She immediately knew that she had lost her composure. She quickly withdrew her hand and hid it behind her back. Chapter 863. Where is the master's grave? I want to pay my respects. Zhang Xiaohua asked sorrowfully. Meng was a little embarrassed. Master's grave is at the back of the mountain of Lingxiang Peak. Only the female disciples of Imo Xiangong can enter there. You probably don't have the qualifications to enter. Zhang Xiaohua nodded. When there is a chance, tell me the location. I'll see if I can sneak in. Sneak in? Meng was very surprised. She then realized something. By the way, Xiaohua, why are you at Lingxiang Peak? Are you a disciple of the fragrance cult? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and asked, what about you? Meng, after you separated from me, you followed Shirtai directly to Lingxiang Peak? Meng nodded and said, yes, I didn't know this before. When I came to Lingxiang Peak, I knew it was the fragrance cult. Later, I gradually learned a lot of things in Jianghu. Then, you just said that you are a disciple of Imo Xiangong. Is that true? Meng smiled bitterly. It's true. However, the leader hasn't announced it yet, so I didn't wear any veil. Alas, you also know that I didn't know martial arts. I was brought to Lingxiang Peak by Master. Although he had been teaching me and I improved quickly, I was still far from the requirements of being a disciple of Imo Xiangong. Therefore, until Master died, I didn't directly say that I would be accepted as a disciple. Later, the leader saw that my filial piety was commendable and allowed me to be a disciple of Master. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua's heart moved. Second brother is Shirtai's registered disciple. This Meng actually became second brother's senior sister. This world is really small. Then Meng said, but the leader has never let go. I don't know why he didn't let me be a disciple of Imo Xiangong. There was some worry between her eyebrows. She looked sideways at the bottom of the mountain as if she had thought of something annoying. Zhang Xiaohua didn't pay attention to it. She just looked at Meng's side profile thoughtfully. After a while, Zhang Xiaohua patted her forehead and said, Meng, I was wondering why your side profile was so familiar. Have you been to the Yulon Canyon and followed Chen? Senior sister Chen? Meng Ji was surprised, you know her? Then he admitted, yes, a few months ago, during the Yulon Dusk refinement, I received special permission from Sir Hierarch to follow senior sister Chen to the Yulon Grand Canyon. Thinking about it, it was really dangerous and I almost couldn't get out. As she spoke, she patted her chest with her hand. Zhang Xiaohua looked at her fair little hand and said with a smile, I happened to be there too, and I saw Chen Chen holding your hand and rushing out of the canyon. What? You went too? You, at that time, that Huang Feng chased after me in a hurry. Could it be that you were right behind me? That's not right. As she spoke, her fair little hand moved from her chest to her mouth. She opened her eyes wide, covered her mouth with one hand, and pointed at Zhang Xiaohua with the other, and said in disbelief, You are the young man standing in the carriage? Then Meng looked up and down at Zhang Xiaohua's tall and thin figure. Yes, it was exactly like this. At that time, I only saw the back of your head, and didn't see your face. That's right, I only saw half of your face. I only felt that you were familiar, and I was wondering which junior sister Chen Chen brought with him. That, we could have met, but unfortunately, it was delayed for so long. Meng was a little melancholy. We finally met, it's better than not meeting. Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile, in the future, we can see each other every day. By the way, can the disciples of Mo Xian Palace go to the entire Lingxiang Peak? Meng murmured, that's not. Before she finished, she smiled and said, that's right, we can go anywhere. Why? Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled, could it be that this bastard is full of evil and was struck by lightning? Meng was surprised, that's right, so brother Xiaohua already knows? What? Zhang Xiaohua jumped up and grabbed Meng's hand, shouting, could it be that this bastard was really struck by lightning? How can this be? I still want to use my sword to split him in half. Meng looked at Zhang Xiaohua's hand and struggled slightly, of course it's true. A few days ago, at noon, many of the disciples in Mo Xian Palace knew that Zhong Pei was struck by lightning in Mo Xian Palace. Hee, Xiaohua, your martial arts are too high, and you still want to strike someone to death? You can't even go up Mo Xian Palace. Zhang Xiaohua shrugged and said disdainfully, what's so great about Mo Xian Palace? Wait till I get angry and charge up with my sword, I'll let you see. Meng pulled her hand out of Zhang Xiaohua's hand and lowered her head, covering her mouth. Stop bragging. However, before she finished her sentence, she suddenly paused and pointed at Zhang Xiaohua's hand. Xiaohua, what are you wearing? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was also surprised. She raised her left hand and looked at it strangely. It was the ring on her index finger. Zhang Xiaohua casually took off the ring and looked at it in the twilight. I don't know, I just picked it up on the mountain one day. It looked strange, so I kept it. Then, he turned his eyes and glanced at the pearl hair clip on Meng's head. He smiled and said, that's right, Meng, I remember that when you gave me the pearl hair clip, I didn't have anything to give you. How about I give you this ring? As a return gift? Meng smiled, didn't you give me your small sword? Could it be that you've lost it? No, the small sword was originally yours. I only took care of it, how could I dare to lose it? As she spoke, she took out Zhu Meng. And, since it's still here, why did you give me a return gift? Moreover, it's been 5 years, don't you think this return gift is too late? Meng said mischievously. This. Zhang Xiaohua said, the small sword is suitable for me, and it will continue to follow me. As for this ring, although it's not worth much, it's also my thought. Although it's 5 years later, but in my heart, it's no different from 5 years ago, so. Zhang Xiaohua's words were somewhat vague, but Meng heard it clearly. The red glow on her face had disappeared. Seeing that Meng didn't say anything, Zhang Xiaohua was a little anxious and asked, how about it, do you want it? Meng still lowered her head and didn't say anything. This. Zhang Xiaohua was very anxious, don't tell me you don't want it. Alas, Zhang Xiaohua was so clever in front of Nie Qianyu, Zhang Ping'er, and even Chen Chen. Why was she so stupid when it came to Meng? You gave her something, and she had the nerve to say that she wanted it? Especially when a boy gave a girl a gift? Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was anxious, Meng nodded slightly and said in a voice smaller than a mosquito, and, although the voice was small, it was like the sound of nature in Zhang Xiaohua's ears. He grabbed Meng's left hand and held the ring for a long time. Then he said with a smile, "Meng, after looking at it for a long time, I think your ring finger is the best match for this ring. She'll take it." Without any explanation, he put the ring on Meng's ring finger. As soon as the ring was put on her finger, Meng immediately withdrew her left hand and hid it behind her back shyly. Zhang Xiaohua saw that Meng took the ring and was happy again. He took out a luminous pearl from his arms and said with a smile, "By the way, I also picked up a luminous pearl on the deserted island. I'll give it to you too." After he finished speaking, he stuffed it into Meng's hand. This time, Meng didn't want it and said, "If you give me something worthless, then it's your intention." "Of course, I'll be happy. But this luminous pearl, forget it," Zhang Xiaohua said anxiously, I just want to give you everything I have, you." Meng heard this and said with a smile, "I know your heart. But, no matter how precious this luminous pearl is, how can it be compared to this ring? How can it be compared to this pearl hair clip?" Meng said these words in a hurry. It was too embarrassing. She looked at the sky and said, "Xiaohua, it's getting late. I have to go back. Tomorrow, if I have time, I'll go to the herb garden to find you. If I can't find you, I'll wait for you here." Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed and kept cheering. He was afraid that Meng would be in trouble if she went back late, so he urged her to go back early. Dream looked at Zhang Xiaohua and smiled sweetly. With a leap, she used her qinggong to leap towards the top of the mountain. Zhang Xiaohua's gaze followed Dream's figure all the way up. Even though she knew that Dream's figure had disappeared, she was still reluctant to part with it and didn't want to take it back. Chapter 864. On Lingering Fragrance Peak, there was a simple and unadorned courtyard. It was completely different from the resplendent, beautiful, and high-eaves palaces around it. There were not many disciples of Lingering Fragrance Peak here. Occasionally, the disciples who passed by were solemn. Not only did they look at the courtyard with longing in their eyes, even their footsteps were light. It was as if there was an extraordinary person living here. The door to the courtyard had not been opened for many years. Although no one came to clean it, the front and back of the door looked clean and tidy, no different from the other places. No one had come to the door for a long time, but now, there were 4 people. The one in front was the white-haired hierarch, followed by Peacock, Chen, and Swift. Standing in front of this very ordinary courtyard, Nun Jingyi seemed to be very emotional. She just stood there quietly, looking at the door without saying a word. Peacock and the others stood 3 feet away from Nun Jingyi, respectfully standing in a triangular formation. They were also very excited. After a while, Nun Jingyi said in a low voice, "This place should be called the Training Courtyard, but for a long time, everyone called it the Heritage Palace to show respect. Actually, is the name that important? As long as we respect it in our hearts, isn't that more important than anything else?" Then, she turned around and said, "I'm sure you all know about this place and have been guessing for a long time. However, you can see what's inside, but you must not spread it. This is a strict order from the seniors in the sect." "Yes, hierarch." When Nun Jingyi heard this, she smiled again and said, 60 years ago, our cult was just like you. We followed behind the previous cult leader with restless hearts. We understand your feelings very well. There's no need to be too nervous. Maybe you all have a chance, or maybe there's only one, or maybe no one has a chance. However, there's no need to worry, everything is up to fate. Yes, you must remember that the immortal Tao pays particular attention to the word fate. Nothing can be forced. If you forget this, even if you're lucky today, your future path won't be long. I'll remember. Alright, there's no need to be long-winded with you. You've all passed the test of the refining heart cave, so you should all be determined people. There's no point in talking too much. With that, Nun Jingyi made a series of gestures. Her movements were somewhat obscure, and she hit the courtyard door with a series of gestures. As the gestures were sent in, an invisible ripple gradually appeared in the open space in front of the courtyard door. Then, the ripple caused the entire courtyard to twist as if it was in water. The three people behind Nun Jing-yi were astonished, and their eyes were filled with envy and curiosity. Needless to say, their hierarch's divine ability was definitely a technique of the immortal Tao, and her divine ability of the immortal Tao was obtained from this seemingly ordinary courtyard. Thinking about how they would have the same divine ability as their hierarch after entering the courtyard, they couldn't help but feel excited, just like the scene in front of them. After a series of gestures, Nun Jing-yi seemed to be unable to withstand it. After a while, she took out a small token from her pocket. She seemed to be chanting something, and then she blew something on the token. With a hua sound, the token emitted a faint, five-colored brilliance. Nun Jing-yi's expression under the veil was even more like a Buddha. She waved her hand, and the token flew into the distorted scene in front of them. The moment the token was thrown in, it was like a drop of water falling into hot oil. The entire space trembled slightly, and after the trembling, the token disappeared. Even the distorted image stopped, and the scene before their eyes was still the same as what Peacock and the others saw. There were no changes at all. Nun Jing-yi didn't dare to delay. She waved her hand and said weakly, "Let's go." Peacock whispered, "Hierarch. Don't you need to rest?" "Hee, there's no need. This isn't something that can be replenished by resting. You'll understand once you obtain the inheritance of the incense religion." He then walked to the door and pushed it open. With a chila sound, the door was pushed open. Peacock and the rest entered in a single file. When they saw the scene in the courtyard, they were even more surprised. There were no buildings in the courtyard. The entire courtyard was a huge hill, and in front of the hill was a cave that was taller than a person. "Are you surprised?" Abbess Jing-yi smiled. "This is the secret room of our fragrant religion. All the hierarchs, oh, I can't say that. After the destruction of the immortal path, all the hierarchs received their inheritance in this secret room. Being ordinary did not mean that it was extraordinary. This seemingly ordinary little hill, this ordinary cave, actually contained the famous secret of the fragrant religion in the pugilistic world." Peacock and the rest were indeed very surprised. They came to Lingering Fragrance Peak when they were young, and after knowing the direction of their hard work, they set their sights on this mysterious place. Needless to say, 1,000 disciples would have 1,000 different imaginations. But out of these 1,000 imaginations, how many could have guessed that there was a small hill inside? At least looking at the three's expressions, they probably couldn't have guessed it. Nun Jing-yi smiled again. "You are the first disciples to pass the selection in 50 years of Lingering Fragrance Peak. You are also the first disciples to have the right to enter the secret room. Once you enter the secret room, you will all have the right to receive the inheritance. But, only one of you will be able to become the hierarch." At this point, Nun Jing-yi took note of the three's expressions. Fortunately, when they heard the word hierarch, their expressions didn't change. Nun Jing-yi continued, "Actually, the position of hierarch has many benefits, such as more opportunities to cultivate. But, most of the matters in the religion are distracting and can hinder one's cultivation. It's a mixed bag of advantages and disadvantages. But whether you're willing or not, the hierarch will be chosen from the three of you. Of course, the earliest disciple among you who obtained the inheritance will be the next sect leader." She added, "As for the other two disciples, if they also receive the inheritance, they will be the next elders. Even if they don't receive the inheritance, they will still be candidates for the next hierarch." "Yes, hierarch. Alright, all of you can go in. This secret room is divided into two parts. The outer part is the immortal cultivation method of our incense cult, while the inner part is the true secret room. You must find a suitable cultivation method for yourself in the outer secret room and memorize it. You don't have to read the rest of the content first. Then, you can enter the true secret room and practice the cultivation method. If you can learn the cultivation method within the stipulated time limit, then you will be considered to have received the inheritance of our incense cult. So simple. Chen Chen couldn't help but blurt out. Simple. Nun Jing-yi smiled. Chen Chen, do you think the cultivation method of the incense cult is the same as the internal strength cultivation method you usually see? Well, although you have mastered the mortal heart cultivation method, to be honest, you only have a 30% chance of being able to master it in 18 days. Since Chen Chen had started speaking, he couldn't hold back anymore. He asked, Hierarch, why is it so little? Nun Jingyi nodded. That's still a good way to put it. You said that you borrowed the light of the mortal heart cultivation method. The mortal heart cultivation method is said to be the closest cultivation method to the heavenly Tao in our incense cult. Therefore, you and Peacock will be able to comprehend the immortal heart cultivation method with half the effort. As for Swift, I estimate that she doesn't even have a 10% chance. When Swift heard this, her face changed color. Nun Jing-yi was not surprised. I shouldn't have discouraged you like this before you enter the secret chamber, but I should remind you in advance. You must be fully prepared. When you enter the secret chamber, it's best to choose the cultivation method that suits you. There's no need to consider whether the name of the cultivation method sounds good or not. Perhaps it's a very powerful cultivation method that you can't even master. Even if you know it, what's the use? Also, I'll let you know in advance that the immortal heart cultivation method is very different from the martial arts you're practicing now. The immortal heart cultivation method is to draw the vitality of heaven and earth into the body. The immortal heart cultivation method is to sense the qi in the dantian. The immortal heart cultivation method is to cultivate the shanzhong point in the middle dantian, not the lower dantian of martial arts. Therefore, you must overcome the habit of practicing martial arts in the past and move your cultivation method closer to the immortal heart cultivation method. Oh, so you're saying, Sir Sect Leader, didn't we practice in vain before? Chen Chen exclaimed. Of course not. Nun Jingyi waved her hand and said, that won't happen. Our seniors at Lingxiang Peak have already found a way to convert martial arts' internal energy into immortal heart qi thousands of years ago. As long as you practice the immortal heart cultivation method to a certain level, you can completely convert your internal energy into qi. This cultivation method, when you obtain the inheritance and become a person of the immortal heart cultivation method, I'll pass it on to you. Oh, that's good. Chen Chen sighed in relief. Alright, I won't say any more. You have 18 days. No matter if you obtain the inheritance or not, you must come out of the secret chamber. Yes, Sir Sect Leader. Nun Jing-yi stepped aside and said with a smile, go in. You must have received the fasting pills. If you haven't, I still have some. Don't come out because you're hungry and waste a great opportunity. Nun Jing-yi was clearly joking to ease their nervous mood. Sure enough, the three of them smiled and said, thank you for the reminder, Sir Sect Leader. Master gave it to us yesterday. The three of them bowed and entered the cave. Sure enough, there was a small study inside the cave. There was a small bookshelf inside, and there were dozens of thin booklets placed on top of it. Beside the bookshelf, there was a round wall that was about the height of a person and emitted a faint white light. Chapter 865. The small hill looked huge, but when Peacock and the rest entered, they realized that it was much bigger than they had imagined. However, when they entered, they were greeted by a rather large study room. The study room did not have many furnishings and there was only a small bookshelf by the wall. There were only a dozen or so books on the bookshelf and they were not very thick. Beside the bookshelf was a wall that emitted a faint white glow and was about the height of a person. Furthermore, there were no tables or chairs in the study room. There were only a few praying mats on the floor. The three of them looked at each other and Swift tactfully said, Senior Peacock, Senior Chen, you two go first. As he spoke, he took 2 steps back. Chen Chen was stunned and pushed Peacock with her shoulder. She smiled and said, Senior Peacock, you're taking advantage of us. You go first. Peacock shook her head and said, according to Sect Leader, the path to immortality is dependent on fate. It's not something that can be taken advantage of just by being in front. This bookshelf may be small, but it is enough for the three of us. You two don't have to be so polite. Let's go together. After she finished speaking, she pulled the two of them to the front. Chen did not think much of it, but Swift's eyes were filled with gratitude. Nun Xuezhen was different from Nun Jingfan. She was not an elder of the incense sect. It was only because of the many chores in the sect that many disciples knew about her. Swift's position in Imo Xian's palace was different from Peacock and Chen Chen's. They did not reveal much about themselves. This time, she was able to stand out and pass the selection. Even the sect leader was surprised. Although the sect leader had already said that the immortal Tao depended on luck, after all, whoever could look at the cultivation technique first would definitely be able to find the cultivation technique that was suitable for them first. This advantage was something that could be thought of even if one thought with their feet. Seeing that Peacock was so generous and did not take advantage of others, Swift immediately felt closer to her. The three of them walked to the front of the bookshelf and looked up and down. They were not in a hurry to choose. The three of them roughly skimmed through the booklets. Firmament Mental Cultivation Method, Star and Moon Mental Cultivation Method, Greenwood Mental Cultivation Method, Water Hazy Mental Cultivation Method. Strange names appeared one by one in front of them. However, all of these books had the same appearance, only the handwriting was different. After pondering for a long time, Peacock saw that the other two didn't want to take it. She stretched out her hand and took out a small booklet with the words Ice Amplification Technique written on it. After Peacock took the mental cultivation technique, the other two also took out their own mental cultivation techniques. They were Blazing Heart Mental Cultivation Technique and Star Slashing Technique, respectively. Following which, the three of them each found a praying mat and sat down cross-legged. Then, they flipped open the book and began to read it carefully. On the mountain path of the distant Flame Hall, Zhang Xiaohua was happily walking. It was as if there was an endless amount of energy in his body. Even his mouth was humming a tune that was out of tune. Beside him, Zhang Pinger was also beaming as she followed behind with a rosy face. Ever since Zhang Xiaohua met her dream, her heart was filled with sunshine. Everything was pleasing to her eyes. Even with Zhang Pinger, she was more talkative. Naturally, Zhang Pinger didn't know the reason. She only thought that her feelings were known by Zhang Xiaohua. Of course, Zhang Xiaohua was the one who secretly displayed their love for each other. Hence, Zhang Pinger was happy with Zhang Xiaohua these few days. Happiness was written all over her face. She didn't look like the ice beauty from Fiery Palace at all. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's energetic figure walking in front of her, Zhang Pinger couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. She raised her voice and said, "Senior, don't walk so fast. Wait for me." I'm not fast. Zhang Xiaohua giggled and quickened her pace. "Senior, you're bullying me. You know that it's not appropriate to use your qinggong here, yet you insist on walking so fast. I can't even catch up to you." Zhang Pinger's tone was a little charming. "Then hurry up. I'll wait for you." Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand. It was as if there was a gust of wind. The red-crowned cranes that were already alert by the side of the road followed Zhang Xiaohua's gesture and soared into the sky. The loud chirps of the birds were exceptionally moving. Ha ha ha. Zhang Xiaohua laughed and turned a corner. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua's figure had disappeared, Zhang Pinger panicked. She stole a glance behind her and used her qinggong to chase after her. However, just as she turned the corner, she bumped into Zhang Xiaohua, who was standing there motionlessly. Zhang Pinger couldn't stop herself and rushed onto Zhang Xiaohua's back. Just as she was about to crash into Zhang Xiaohua tilted her body slightly and wrapped her arms around Zhang Pinger's waist. You're courting death." Zhang Pinger's mouth and nose were filled with Zhang Xiaohua's scent. She looked at Zhang Xiaohua's brows in a daze and said, "You're scaring me by hiding here." Unexpectedly, Zhang Xiaohua didn't say a word. She put Zhang Pinger down and looked ahead. Zhang Pinger stood on the ground and felt a little reluctant. She tugged on Zhang Xiaohua's clothes and was about to say something when she heard a deep voice behind her. Junior Zhang, you're really passionate. Ah! When Zhang Ping'er heard this, she almost screamed in shock. She raised her head and looked at Zhang Xiaohua in disbelief. Her face was as dark as water. She immediately turned around and saw a middle-aged man with a full forehead and a slightly dignified look on his face. At this moment, there was a hint of mockery in the man's eyes. Seeing this man, Zhang Ping'er's face was immediately filled with nervousness. She retracted her hand from Zhang Xiaohua's clothes and said softly with a red face, "Senior brother Shi." Hearing Zhang Ping'er call this man senior brother Shi, Zhang Xiaohua was even more shocked. In her impression, the fragrant religion respected the female disciples. As long as the male disciples saw a female disciple, they would call her senior sister, regardless of age. On Lingering Fragrance Peak, it was even more so. Although Zhang Ping'er was young, many male disciples from the distant fire hall called her senior sister Zhang. At this moment, this senior sister Zhang actually called this male disciple senior brother Shi instead of senior brother in private. This meant that this male disciple's identity was thought-provoking. Hence, Zhang Xiaohua unconsciously narrowed her eyes and looked at the middle-aged man who blocked her path when she turned around the mountain path. "You still remember that I am senior brother Shi?" The middle-aged man's eyes were filled with mockery as he stared at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "This is the new alchemy disciple from the distant fire hall, Ren Xiaoyao?" When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she immediately smiled and cupped her hands. "This one is indeed Ren Xiaoyao. I wonder if senior brother Shi, senior brother Shi." The middle-aged man waved his hand and said arrogantly, "You are just a small alchemy disciple. You are not worthy to call me senior brother." Zhang Xiaohua looked at this guy and the smile on her face didn't change. She cupped her hands and said, "Up to you. Anyway, I am just a small alchemy disciple. I won't be able to see senior brother Shi. It doesn't matter if I don't call you senior brother Shi." Hee hee. Senior brother Shi laughed. "Little brat, you are quite arrogant. No wonder Zhang Ping'er likes you." When Zhang Ping'er heard this, her face turned even redder. She took half a step forward and stood in front of Zhang Xiaohua. She said, "Senior brother Shi, senior. Junior brother Ren doesn't know anything. He doesn't know the rules of Lingering Fragrance Peak. Senior brother, if you have something to say, you should tell me." Senior brother Shi raised his head and said proudly, "Since I am here, I naturally have something to say to you." Then, he stared at the two of them and asked, "The two of you are so intimate now. I wonder what my third junior brother thinks." "Third junior brother?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and looked at Zhang Ping'er. Zhang Ping'er didn't need to turn her head to know Zhang Xiaohua's reaction. She immediately argued, "Senior brother Shi, don't talk nonsense. I have nothing to do with senior brother you." "What?" Senior brother Shi glanced at her and said, "Don't tell me that my third junior brother went to the distant fire hall a few months ago for no reason." Zhang Ping'er's face was pale. She looked at Zhang Xiaohua nervously and explained to senior brother Shi and Zhang Xiaohua, "During that period of time, my master was seriously ill. I was in a bad mood. Senior brother you did come over to comfort me. But, ever since master recovered, I haven't contacted senior brother you." "Senior brother you?" When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she knew who it was. Wasn't he the unlucky guy who died in her hands? Of course, Zhang Xiaohua also knew the purpose of senior brother Shi's visit. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua didn't say anything, Zhang Ping'er anxiously said, and ever since junior brother Ren came to the distant fire hall, I haven't seen senior brother Yu's shadow." "Eh? Is that so?" Senior brother Shi was stunned. "You really haven't seen him all this time?" Zhang Ping'er nodded. "That's right. I've been with junior brother Ren these few days. If you don't believe me, you can ask him." Senior brother Shi smiled. "That's exactly what I wanted to ask. Ren Xiaoyao, Do you remember the Yuzhuchuan who wanted to buy the odd man from you on the way to Lingering Fragrance Peak? Senior brother Yu. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly said, I remember. So the senior brother you guys talked about for a long time is the handsome senior brother Yu. Of course I remember. I just don't know. Senior brother Shi. Are you here to ask about our senior brother Yu? Yes, it's good that you know. Senior brother Shi nodded. Ren Xiaoyao, after you came to Lingering Fragrance Peak, have you seen my junior brother Yu? For example, in the distant fire hall, in the Lichui Valley, or in the medicine garden? Senior brother Shi's words were clear, but Zhang Xiaohua had a confused face. She shook her head and said, I've only seen senior brother Yu outside of Lingering Fragrance Peak. When I came to Lingering Fragrance Peak, I've never seen him. That's right, I only went to Lichui Valley to test my martial arts. I only went in once, how could I see senior brother Yu? Could it be that senior brother Yu also wanted to test his martial arts? Lichui Valley. Zhang Ping'er wasn't stupid and immediately became alert. She turned her head to look at Zhang Xiaohua. However, she immediately thought that if Yuzhuchuan entered Lichui Valley, how could Zhang Xiaohua come out? She couldn't help but feel a little scared. Well, since you haven't seen him before, then forget it. That senior brother Shi obviously didn't have anything that could be used against him. He probably heard the stories of others and felt that it was related to Zhang Xiaohua, so he came to ask. Of course, if I know that something has happened to junior brother Yu, or if it has anything to do with you, don't blame me for not showing mercy. When Zhang Ping'er heard this, she immediately took half a step forward. Senior brother Shi didn't even look at them. His feet didn't seem to exert much strength as he floated up and headed straight for the top of the mountain. Chapter 866. After Senior Shi left, Zhang Xiaohua didn't say anything and continued to walk forward. She lowered her head as she walked as if she was thinking about something. Zhang Ping'er carefully followed behind her. She held on to the corner of her palace dress and didn't dare to say anything. After walking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua slowed down her footsteps and asked, Junior sister, who is this Senior Shi? Hearing Zhang Xiaohua's question, Zhang Ping'er's face lit up with joy. She immediately caught up and said anxiously, Senior brother, you have to believe me. I have nothing to do with that Yuzhuchuan. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I know. I just want to know who this Senior Shi is. Senior Shi? Zhang Ping'er relaxed and forced a smile. Senior Shi is called Shimujuan. He is the eldest disciple of Rui Jinhal's grand elder Jing Gang. Yuzhuchuan is Jing Gang's third disciple. Senior brother, you have to believe me. I really have nothing to do with Yuzhuchuan. Zhang Xiaohua nodded, I know. However, why did you call Shimujuan senior brother? Isn't Lingering Fragrance Peak female disciples the most respected? Senior brother, you don't know. Zhang Ping'er explained, generally speaking, female disciples should be respected on Lingxiang Peak, but this Jinggang Shirtai is a little different. She is the senior sister of Hierarch Darren. Moreover, it is said that she fell behind Hierarch Darren by a small margin and was unable to take charge of the Lingxiang cult. Therefore, she took a step back and took the important position of Great Elder. Moreover, Grand Elder Jing Gang is in charge of Rui Jinhal. This Rui Jinhal is responsible for the safety of Lingering Fragrance Peak. When senior brother first came to Lingering Fragrance Peak, he met a few disciples who were guarding the peak. Therefore, Rui Jinhal is considered the strongest hall on Lingering Fragrance Peak. Most of the disciples in Rui Jinhal were male. Jinggang Shirtai's 6 disciples were also mostly male. Especially Shimujuan, he was her eldest disciple. His martial arts were even more powerful than the senior sisters in Imo Xian's palace. Due to Great Elder Jing Gang's special identity, other than the female disciples of Imo Xian Palace, the disciples of the other palaces all have to address the 6 disciples of Jing Gang Shirtai as senior martial brothers. Oh. Zhang Xiaohua understood and asked casually, what about Yuzhuchuan? Senior brother Yu. Zhang Pinger's face was somewhat red as she said, Senior brother Yu's martial arts are also first-rate, and his personality is also outstanding, so he is deeply liked by Jing Gang Shirtai. Since young, he has always been under her protection, so, in the various halls of Lingering Fragrance Peak, there are basically no disciples who dare to go against him. That's right, senior brother, how did you meet senior brother Yu on your way here? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and told him about her encounter with Yu Shuichuan. Zhang Pinger was very anxious when she heard this. Senior brother, you should have given him the David steer. He is a very petty person. He might cause trouble for you in the future. Oh, that's right, that senior martial brother you didn't make trouble for you in Lai Chui Valley, did he? He is a disciple of Rui Jin Palace, and there are no restrictions on him entering and leaving Lai Chui Valley. Zhang Xiaohua curled his lips and said secretly, just a dead man, and he dares to cause trouble for this young master? However, he said perfunctorily, AI, how would I know who he is? Huan has been with me for so many years, how can I bear to give her to others? What should I do? Zhang Pinger was a little embarrassed. She gritted her teeth and said, Senior martial brother, I will go to Rui Jin Palace in 2 days and tell senior brother Yu. Oh, senior martial brother, don't look at me. I really have nothing to do with senior brother Yu. Zhang Pinger had already explained to Zhang Xiaohua 3 times in a row. Zhang Xiaohua was about to comfort her, but when she looked up, she unconsciously smiled and shouted, Meng, you are here? Why aren't you waiting for me in the medicinal garden? Zhang Pinger was looking at Zhang Xiaohua anxiously. How could she pay attention to the people and things in front of her? When Zhang Xiaohua ignored her and walked away quickly, she came to her senses. When she saw Meng standing in front of the medicinal garden with a strange expression on her face, she immediately felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Her face was pale without any color, and her hands and feet were weak. Even she didn't know how she moved to the entrance of the medicinal garden. Zhang Xiaohua cheerfully walked to the door and called out intimately, Meng, you came so early today. Meng's expression was very complicated. She looked at Zhang Xiaohua and was about to speak, but Zhang Pinger, who was behind her, stepped forward with trembling lips and saluted, Disciple Zhang Pinger greets senior sister Zi Xia. Meng was also surprised and smiled, Zhang Pinger. You know me? Zhang Pinger smiled bitterly, you are a disciple of Emonin Palace and Shirtai's disciple. How can I not know you? However, Zhang Pinger still didn't give up and asked, Senior sister Zi Xia, I wonder, how do you know junior brother Ren? Junior brother Ren? Meng smiled and remembered what Zhang Xiaohua said a few days ago. She said, Junior brother Ren and I are old friends. Zhang Xiaohua also said happily, Senior sister Zhang, I have been looking for senior sister Zi Xia for many years, but I never thought that she would be at Lingxiang Peak. This is all thanks to you. If you didn't bring me from Pill Repository Hall to Distant Flame Hall, I wouldn't have met her here. As he spoke, Zhang Xiaohua tugged on Meng's sleeve and said, Senior sister Zixia and I thank you for your help. Zhang Pinger's face was originally pale, but now it was even paler. There were faint tears in her eyes, but she held them back and shook her head, It's nothing. Senior brother and senior sister Zi Xia are a match made in heaven. Even if it wasn't for me, you two would still meet under the arrangement of heaven. After saying that, a wave of sadness surged in her chest. The feeling of making a wedding dress for someone else filled her mind. Zhang Pinger couldn't help but cry, this mountain wind is really strong. Zhang Pinger tried to cover it up and was about to leave, there are still many things in the alchemy room. Senior sister Zi Xia, stay with senior brother for a while. I will go first. After seeing Zhang Pinger's appearance in his dream, how could he not know what she was thinking? She immediately pulled her hand and said, Junior sister Zhang, you're overthinking it. Little Ren Xiaoyao and I are just old acquaintances. Although I remember him, how could we have such a relationship like you're saying? I look at junior sister apprentice Zhang's fair face and slim figure. That's Ren Xiaoyao's. Don't you think so? Ren Xiaoyao? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He didn't understand why Meng said that. He didn't know whether to nod or shake his head. It was extremely awkward. When Zhang Pinger heard this, a glimmer of hope immediately rose in her heart. She couldn't move her feet no matter what. At this time, there were some noisy voices on the mountain path. Zhang Pinger quickly said, "Senior Sister Zi Xia, I still have things to do in the alchemy room. I will leave first." After saying that, she bowed and raised her head to look at Zhang Xiaohua with hidden bitterness. Then, she hurriedly left. Meng didn't want anyone to see her, so he smiled and entered the herb garden. Zhang Xiaohua followed him and entered. He asked puzzledly, "Meng, you. Why did you say that?" "I was worried that I wouldn't have a chance to explain it to senior sister Zhang. Now that you said that, won't she misunderstand?" Meng shook his head and said with a smile, "She is an innocent girl who is infatuated with you. When you mentioned her a few days ago, I felt that something was wrong. Now that I see it, it is indeed so. She has put in so much effort. How can you let her down?" Zhang Xiaohua panicked and was about to explain. Meng asked again, "Why did Shi Mujuan look for you?" "Shi Mujuan?" Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. "You know him too?" "Yes, I know him. He is the eldest disciple of the famous Great Elder Jing Gang. There aren't many people in the entire Lingering Fragrance Peak who don't know him. He, this young master is one of them. Stop talking nonsense. Why did he look for you?" "Nothing much. His third junior brother disappeared. He came to ask me and even threatened me. If it has anything to do with me, he will teach me a lesson." Meng's face turned pale when he heard that. He said unnaturally, "Isn't his third junior brother Yu Shuchuan? Why did he look for you?" Zhang Xiaohua explained everything in detail. "In the end," she said, "not only did this guy pester Zhang Pinger, he even wanted to snatch my David's deer. One look and you can tell that he is not a good person. Who knows where he is now? Who knows, he might have already killed someone. How is that possible? They are all under the protection of Great Elder Jing Gang. Even if Lord Cult Leader wants to teach them a lesson, he will have to think twice." Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. "Doesn't the Lingering Fragrance cult have rules? The first, second, and third rule are all extremely powerful. Aren't they afraid?" Meng snorted and said disdainfully, "That's only for ordinary disciples. As the saying goes, a doctor can't be punished. Since ancient times, there has been a group of so-called privileged classes in this world. They are never bound by any rules. Although there are many rules and strict rules, they are ineffective against them." Zhang Xiaohua came to a realization and snorted. "Lend me the 3-foot cold blade to sweep away all the thieves in the world. If they offend me, I will directly take their lives." Clap, clap, clap. Meng clapped and praised, "A real man should be like this." She then said worriedly, "It's just that your martial arts are not good enough. Compared to them, the difference is too big. Even if they can pinch you to death with their little finger, you, still have to be careful. Don't lose your life because of some unimportant things. If you do, your parents will be very sad." Zhang Xiaohua was a little puzzled when he heard this. Was this encouragement or a blow to him? Happy times were always short. Zhang Xiaohua felt that she was dreaming. The days were always short. Before she could do anything, it was already dark. During this day, Zhang Pinger, who usually came to harass Zhang Xiaohua, did not show up. Zhang Xiaohua felt a little uneasy. Sometimes, when Meng talked about Zhang Pinger in front of Zhang Xiaohua, she seemed to be full of admiration. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know if it was to show her generosity or something else, but she would always say things that Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand. When Zhang Xiaohua asked her about it, Meng would just smile and look at him quietly. It was as if the more she looked at him, the less he looked at her. This made Zhang Xiaohua very depressed. She could only explain her relationship with Zhang Pinger, just like how Zhang Pinger explained her relationship with Yu Shuchuan earlier. Just like that, the day passed by happily. Chapter 867. Ever since Zhang Pinger met the dream, she no longer went to find Zhang Xiaohua. Occasionally, when she met Zhang Xiaohua, she would stay far away. She only peeked at him and did not say a word. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to say something to her, but he thought that some things would only get messier, so he ignored her. He believed that Zhang Pinger was the same as Niet Xianyu. One day, she would understand. If things were so simple, Zhang Xiaohua would not be troubled. Ever since the dream met Zhang Pinger, she stayed with Zhang Xiaohua in the herb garden for an entire day. She only returned to Mo Xian Palace when the sky turned dark. She was nowhere to be seen for the next few days. Zhang Xiaohua thought that something had happened to the dream at first, so he did not care. However, after waiting for more than 10 days, he still did not see her. He could not help but feel anxious. He went to the hot spring several times to wait for the dream, but he did not see her. Instead, he met many female disciples of Mo Xian Palace bathing. However, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was filled with the dream. How could he care about these cheap spring scenery? He only scanned with his divine sense. When he saw that it was not a dream, he immediately left. In these 10 days, Zhang Xiaohua had never been so troubled. He had never been so anxious. This was not the demeanor of an immortal cultivator. He tried to calm down and comprehend the heavenly Tao and the talismans. However, as soon as he sat down, the shadow of the dream would appear in front of him. His heart was filled with sorrow. He only wanted to know what the dream was doing at this time. He wanted to know why she did not come to see him. He could only cultivate the fist of the North Star as usual. When he was extremely frustrated, he would practice it again and again. Of course, he did not care about the entire herb garden. He also ignored the spells recorded in the small book. Fortunately, the herbs were planted well and there were no problems. On this day, Zhang Xiaohua was pacing back and forth in the garden. She wondered if she should take the risk and break through some restrictions to go from Lihua Hall to Mo Xian Palace to see what had happened in her dream. Suddenly, he heard someone shouting from outside the courtyard, "Junior brother Ren, a disciple of Mo Xian Palace is looking for you." Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He immediately used his movement technique and came out. Sure enough, there was Zhang Pinger and another disciple with a white veil. When Zhang Pinger saw Zhang Xiaohua, she lowered her head and said, "Senior Martial Sister, this is Ren Xiaoyao." "Martial Sister. Do you have something to say to him?" After he finished speaking, he stepped aside respectfully and didn't even look at Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua scanned with his divine sense and knew that he didn't know this disciple from Mo Xian Gong. He asked curiously, "Senior sister, why are you looking for me?" The female disciple didn't say anything. Instead, she looked Zhang Xiaohua up and down. She snorted and said, "I thought you were some kind of peerless character, but you're just an ordinary disciple who can't be any more ordinary. You're just a toad who wants to eat swan meat. Why don't you think about your status? How dare you have ideas about senior sister Xia?" Zhang Xiaohua was originally angry, but when he heard Xia, he immediately became anxious. "Xia. Senior Martial Sister, what happened to her? Why haven't I seen her in so many days?" "Senior Martial Sister Xia." The disciple sneered, "Is that something you can call her? Why don't you get some water and use it as a mirror to look at yourself? You are too inferior compared to him. How can you be worthy of Senior Martial Sister Xia?" Zhang Xiaohua's eyes narrowed. He was about to explode in anger. Zhang Pinger, who was beside him, had already noticed. She pulled him back and said, "Senior. Junior brother Ren, why is this Senior Martial Sister looking for you?" Zhang Xiaohua took a deep breath and said, "Senior Martial Sister, please enlighten me. The female disciple looked at Zhang Xiaohua with disdain and said coldly, "Senior sister Zixia asked me to pass on a message to you. She knows everything about you. Since your heart already belongs to someone else, and she's waiting for you, you shouldn't do anything to hurt others and make them sad. Your fate with her has come to an end. From now on, there are no more dreams in this world, only Zixia. You shouldn't go looking for her." As soon as this sentence came out, Zhang Xiaohua was immediately stunned on the spot. It was as if he had been struck by lightning and was about to be struck by lightning. Zhang Pinger, who was at the side, was shocked, but at the same time, a feeling of gratitude rose in her heart. Wasn't the others mentioned by Zixia her? At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was in a mess. Oh no, Meng knows about me and Ye Chenyu. I knew it. The things in the illusion were not without reason. In these 10 days, Meng must have asked about my past. Why didn't I tell her clearly? If I told her clearly, perhaps she would forgive me. After all, I had no choice but to do this because I wanted to find second brother. Sigh, Senior Marshal Uncle Yang Yaoyang, you. Why are you so talkative? Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua didn't say anything, the female disciple became even more proud. She waved her hand and said, "All right, I have already told you what Senior Marshal Sister Zixia asked me to tell you. Senior Marshal Sister Zixia didn't ask you to reply to her, so you don't have to say anything. Think about your own position and do your own things well. If you gain the favor of Deputy Hall Masterine, she might give you some benefits. Don't bite off more than you can chew and do things that are beyond your ability." Then, she turned around and was about to leave. Zhang Xiaohua immediately called out, "Senior Marshal Sister. Where is Zixia now? Where else can she be?" The female disciple smiled and said, "Of course she is in Imo Xian Palace at the top of Lingering Fragrance Peak." Then, she smiled mysteriously and said, "However, there is another news that I think I should tell you. Rui Jinhal's great elder Jing Gang's eldest disciple has already formally proposed marriage to Lord Sect Leader. The betrothal gifts have already been sent to Mo Xian Palace, waiting for Senior Marshal Sister Zixia to nod her head. If nothing goes wrong, the entire Lingering Fragrance Peak will be able to drink their wedding wine." Ah! Zhang Xiaohua fell into an ice cave. How is that possible? Meng, how could she? At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was in a mess. It was as if the sky was falling and the earth was caving in. Her heart was also beating wildly. She looked at the surrounding scene with an unreal feeling. How could this be? How could it not be? The female disciple smiled and said, "If she didn't choose Senior Marshal Brother could it be that she would choose you, the little medicine boy?" Zhang Xiaohua still shook her head. "No. Meng must be angry with me. I should tell her. If she knows the truth, she will definitely forgive me." The truth? The female disciple disdained. "Senior Marshal Sister Zixia didn't let me pass the message. If you have the ability, go tell her yourself." Ha ha ha. Then, she contemptuously said, "I think your waste token can't go to Lingering Fragrance Peak." Then, she looked at Zhang Xiaohua's clenched fist and mocked, "Don't tell me you want to go to Lingering Fragrance Peak." Ha ha ha. Go to Lingering Fragrance Peak, go to Lingering Fragrance Peak. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up. She thought of what she said to Meng, "If you are angry with me or refuse to see me, then even if I have to hold a long sword, I will go to Lingering Fragrance Peak to see you." Ha ha ha. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed, "Isn't it just going to Lingering Fragrance Peak? Then, I will show you." When Zhang Pinger heard this, she became anxious. She hugged Zhang Xiaohua and said, Senior Marshal Brother, don't say such crazy things." Then, she turned to the female disciple and said, "Senior Marshal Sister, please don't blame him. Senior Marshal Brother was angry and spoke nonsense. Don't take it seriously." When the female disciple heard this, she immediately laughed and said, "You actually called him Senior Marshal Brother? Ha ha ha, I know what Senior Marshal Sister Xia means. A pair of dogs. After she finished speaking, she used her qing gong and rose from the ground. Zhang Pinger's warm body protected Zhang Xiaohua, making it difficult for Zhang Xiaohua. How could Zhang Pinger care? She only said, Senior Marshal brother, Senior Marshal Sister Xia probably misunderstood us. Wait a moment, I will go find Master and ask for a token. I will go to Emo Xian Palace and explain everything to Senior Marshal Sister Xia. Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, Junior Marshal Sister, let go of your hand. Only then did Zhang Pinger come to her senses and quickly let go of Zhang Xiaohua's hand. Her face was flushed red. When Zhang Pinger let go, Zhang Xiaohua immediately rose from the ground and used the ethereal steps to run away. As he ran, he laughed and said, Isn't it just lingering fragrance peak? Today, this young master will use his sword to fight his way up lingering fragrance peak. I want to see if this lingering fragrance peak is a dragon's lair or a tiger's den. Oh no! Zhang Pinger was shocked. She immediately flew up and chased after Zhang Xiaohua. However, Zhang Xiaohua's qing gong was so powerful that he disappeared without a trace in a moment. Zhang Pinger's face was filled with anxiety. She didn't know what to do. Suddenly, her face lit up with joy. She changed her direction and went in another direction. After a short while, Zhang Pinger arrived at a small courtyard. Without waiting for her to land, she shouted, Eldest senior sister, eldest senior sister. The voice in the courtyard replied, Is it Pinger? I am here. Why are you so flustered? Zhang Pinger rushed in and grabbed Han Zhuiqi, who was sitting cross-legged on the praying mat. She said anxiously, Senior Marshal Sister, quick, quick. Ren Xiaoyao is going to rush to lingering fragrance peak. Han Zhuiqi couldn't believe her ears. She asked curiously, Rush? Lingering fragrance peak? Who? Ren Xiaoyao. It's your. How is this possible? Why is he going to rush to lingering fragrance peak? Does he have the ability to do so? Zhang Pinger didn't have time to explain. She pulled Han Zhuiqi and rushed out. Senior Marshal Sister, I beg you. Hurry up and help me. When you stop Ren Xiaoyao, you can ask me to do anything. Ah! He is really going to rush to lingering fragrance peak. This. Ren Xiaoyao doesn't want to live anymore. Han Zhuiqi was somewhat convinced. She quickly exerted strength in her legs and ran towards the main mountain path of lingering fragrance peak. Ping, have you told Master about this? I wouldn't dare. If Master were to find out that Ren Xiaoyao hadn't left yet, she would have killed him with a single palm strike. Let's wait for eldest senior sister to capture him before slowly apologizing to Master. Zhang Pinger said with a bitter smile. Where is he? Zhang Pinger's eyes were naturally sharp when it came to her sweetheart. From afar, she could see a tall and skinny figure. It was Fetus who held a long sword in his hand as he walked steadily towards the main mountain path of lingering fragrance peak. Chapter 868. Zhang Pinger's eyes were sharp. She had already spotted a tall and skinny figure in the distance. She was holding a long sword and walking towards the main mountain path of lingering fragrance peak. Although she couldn't see clearly, Zhang Pinger knew that it was the furious Zhang Xiaohua. Over there! Zhang Pinger shouted and walked towards Zhang Xiaohua. However, before she could get up, she was pulled back by Han Zhuiqi. Senior sister, what are you doing? Let's hurry up and stop Ren Xiaoyao. Don't let him get into trouble. Zhang Pinger was puzzled. Along the way, Han Zhuiqi had already asked Zhang Pinger about what happened. She glared at Zhang Pinger and said, Seventh junior sister, from what you said, Ren Xiaoyao is also a heartless person. When he saw senior sister Xia, he fell in love with her. He might have saved you because you were a disciple of lingering fragrance peak. Now that he saw senior sister Xia, who has a higher status, he abandoned you. Why are you still chasing after him? Just let him go. Even if he is killed by a disciple of Rui Jinhao, he deserves it. Zhang Ping'er didn't expect her eldest senior sister to have such thoughts. She immediately pulled her sleeve and said, "Eldest senior sister, I have never asked you for anything. No matter what, you must help me stop Ren Xiaoyao. I know what you said is reasonable, but Ren Xiaoyao is definitely not that kind of person. Moreover, looking at senior sister Xia, she is indeed an old acquaintance of his. Yes, Ren Xiaoyao even knows senior sister Xia's previous name. If he is a flatterer, how can he know so much after coming to distant Flame Hall for a few days? He has already abandoned you. Why are you still unwilling to give up?" Eldest senior sister, Zhang Ping'er looked at Zhang Xiaohua's receding figure and said anxiously, "Let's talk as we walk." As she spoke, she tugged on Han Zhuqi's sleeve and stood up. She continued, "I didn't make it clear to Ren Xiaoyao. Perhaps he still doesn't know my intentions. He can't blame anyone else. Even if I give up on him now, I can't just watch him jump into the fire pit." He had just arrived at Lingering Fragrance Peak. How could he know that barging into Lingering Fragrance Peak was a capital offense? No matter how high his martial arts were, it was impossible for him to challenge the entire Rui Jin Palace alone. "I just want to stop him, let him calm down, and save his life." Han Zhuqi followed Zhang Ping'er to catch up with Zhang Xiaohua, and she couldn't help but sigh. "Ping'er, from what senior martial sister Xia said, she knows that you have feelings for Zhang Xiaohua, and she intends to help you. Don't tell me you don't want to, go with the flow?" Zhang Ping'er looked at Zhang Xiaohua, who was gradually getting closer, and sighed. "Nothing forcibly done will be sweet. Ren Xiaoyao's heart is not with me, so why should I force him? Didn't you see how he could risk his life for senior martial sister Xia and barge into Lingering Fragrance Peak? If he treats me like this, even if he wants me to die immediately, I would be willing to do so. Unfortunately, that is only for the sake of others." She then forced a smile and said, "I'll wait for senior martial sister to capture him. Then, I'll immediately ask for master's token and go to Mo Xian Palace to find senior martial sister Xia. I'll tell her about Ren Xiaoyao's feelings for her. It's just my wishful thinking. Let senior martial sister Xia get rid of the misunderstanding. Let them, lovers, finally get married. TSK TSK. Han Zhuqi bared her teeth and said, "What a loyal and infatuated woman. Even if you risk yourself, you'll help others. You didn't think about the possibility of Ren Xiaoyao and senior martial sister Xia being together?" Zhang Ping'er was also sad. "I know this, but when I see Ren Xiaoyao's unhappy expression, I feel very uncomfortable." "You actually dodged this soul-enchanting bell." Before she finished speaking, the silver bells on the ribbon attacked. It was the main acupuncture point on Zhang Xiaohua's back. Seeing that it was about to hit, Zhang Xiaohua didn't even turn her head and only pushed the Great Wisdom Sword back. Paw! The silver bells really hit the sword. The Great Wisdom Sword didn't move at all, but the silver bells flew back. Strange, what sword is this? After hitting the silver bells, Zhang Xiaohua didn't hesitate and quickly walked forward. "Stop!" Han Zhuqi was even angrier. She used her Qinggong and blocked in front of Zhang Xiaohua. She smiled and said, "Junior brother Ren, if you want to barge into Lingering Fragrance Peak, then you have to pass through me first. Senior sister Han, why do you have to do this? I know you have good intentions, but I also don't want to hurt senior sister. Senior sister should tactfully step aside. I will definitely remember your great kindness in the future." Zhang Ping'er, who was at the side, said, "Senior brother, don't go. I know your martial arts are high, but barging into Lingering Fragrance Peak is a capital offense. How can you be the opponent of so many disciples of Rui Jin Palace?" Zhang Xiaohua looked at Zhang Ping'er. She didn't know what to say to this infatuated girl. She only shook her head and said, "If I don't see the dream and clear up this misunderstanding, how can my heart be at ease? If I can't see the dream in the future, what else can I miss in this world?" After saying that, she walked towards Han Jueqi. Han Jueqi also didn't hold back. She waved her hand and the red ribbons attacked Zhang Xiaohua's main acupuncture points like a spirit snake. Zhang Xiaohua waved her heavy sword and countered every move. Every time the silver bells were hit, they flew back and rang out. This mountain path was the only path from the distant fire hall to the main mountain path of the lingering fragrance peak. The fight between the two of them had already attracted the attention of many disciples from the distant fire hall. Some of the bolder ones even walked a short distance away to secretly watch. Han Jueqi's red ribbons attack was ineffective. She unconsciously felt a little embarrassed and angry. She waved the red ribbons and it spread out like a tornado, rolling towards Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dodge. She only waited for the ribbons to come close. She raised the heavy sword in her hand and blocked the front of the ribbons. It was like a whirlwind and also like a spirit snake wrapping around her body. The entire heavy sword was tightly wrapped. The red ribbons were originally meant to wrap around Zhang Xiaohua, but unexpectedly, it was broken by Zhang Xiaohua and only wrapped around her weapon. Han Jueqi was slightly stunned. Just as she was about to retrieve the ribbons, she heard Zhang Xiaohua say softly, "Senior Han, I'm sorry to offend you." Before she could finish her sentence, Han Jueqi felt a huge force coming from her hand. Before the internal energy in her meridians could react, the red ribbons flew out of her hand and landed in Zhang Xiaohua's hand. "You!" Han Jueqi was shocked. The red ribbons were her personal weapon. It had always been soft and was effective against swords and sabers. No one had ever taken it away from her before. Zhang Xiaohua shook her heavy sword and the red ribbons obediently fell to the ground. Zhang Xiaohua caught it with her hand and didn't return it to Han Jueqi. She loosened her hand and it landed on the grass beside the mountain path. Soon after, Zhang Xiaohua looked deeply at Han Jueqi and walked past her. Han Jueqi stared at Zhang Xiaohua. Her heart was in turmoil. Only when Zhang Xiaohua brushed past her did she regain her senses. She clenched her fist and shouted, "Ren Xiaoyao, why are you hiding your martial arts? What are your intentions?" Seeing that Han Jueqi's fist was filled with internal energy and was about to hit her shoulder, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "What martial arts are you hiding? Why don't I know about it?" Before she finished her sentence, she sent a palm strike towards Han Jueqi's fist. Han Jueqi saw that Zhang Xiaohua's palm strike was light and had the demeanor of a master. She didn't dare to be negligent and gathered 70% of her internal energy into her fist. The disciples at the side were also secretly on tenterhooks, waiting for an earth-shattering sound. However, when the fist and palm collided, there wasn't any sound. Han Jueqi felt that her fist had hit cotton and didn't seem to have any strength. When Zhang Xiaohua's palm touched Han Jueqi's fist, her entire body floated up as if she was hit and flew forward. Borrowing strength? Han Jueqi was shocked. An ordinary borrowing strength naturally wouldn't cause Han Jueqi to lose her composure. However, Han Jueqi's fist contained 70% of her internal energy. Even if it hit a rock, the rock would shatter. Ren Xiaoyao actually caught her fist firmly and didn't suffer any injuries. He even used the momentum of her fist to display his qinggong. This. What kind of martial arts was this? At least, Han Jueqi knew that she was definitely not this person's match. Chapter 869. Not only was Han Jueqi shocked, even the surrounding distant Fire Palace disciples who were watching from afar were also shocked. Everyone's jaws almost dropped to the ground. No one would have thought that senior sister Han, who was second to none in distant Fire Palace, was actually unable to take down Zhang Xiaohua. Even Zhang Pinger's mouth was agape. She had seen Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts and knew that his martial arts were so powerful that he could even kill Lei Hu. But with her knowledge of martial arts, that was all. In her mind, other than the inner disciples of Lingering Fragrance Peak's Mo Shui Palace and the peak-guarding disciples of Ruijin Palace, the most powerful ones were Distant Fire Palace Master and her own master. Then, it was her senior sister Hanjuiqi. Hanjuiqi was much older than Zhang Ping'er and was Yin Yin's senior disciple. Most of the time, she taught on behalf of Master. Zhang Ping'er was Yin Yin's youngest disciple in name, but most of her martial arts were taught by Hanjuiqi. This was also the reason why Zhang Ping'er first thought of Hanjuiqi to capture Zhang Xiaohua. Because in Zhang Ping'er's impression, no matter how powerful Zhang Xiaohua was, he was definitely not Hanjuiqi's match. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua escape so easily, Zhang Ping'er was shocked and immediately ran up and grabbed Hanjuiqi's arm. She cried, "Senior sister, what should we do? You can't stop him." Hanjuiqi also calmed down and let out a long sigh. Her eyes were filled with deep meaning as she looked at Zhang Ping'er and said, "Ping'er, look, where did you find such a powerful person? Among the disciples of Pill Expanding Hall, can there be someone with such high martial arts? Even old man Zishin only has this level of martial arts. Ah! How is that possible?" Zhang Ping'er was even more incredulous. Ren Xiaoyao is just a disciple of Pill Expanding Hall, how can he be more powerful than their hall master? But she didn't have the heart to think about this and only shook Hanjuiqi's arm. "Senior sister, youth, quickly think of a way, he's about to reach the mountain path. What can we do?" Hanjuiqi shook her head. "Even if we look for Master now, it's too late." Hanjuiqi raised her head and looked at the figure in the distance who was still steadily walking forward. She said thoughtfully, "Perhaps, the outcome of this matter might not be as serious as you think." "How is this possible?" Zhang Ping'er was so worried about Zhang Xiaohua's safety that she almost cried. Trespassing on Lingering Fragrance Peak is a serious crime. Furthermore, the disciples of Ruijin Palace stopped him. Even if they wanted his life, they wouldn't have to bear any responsibility. Will he still be alive? Then, she thought of something and turned pale. She cried out, "Eldest senior sister, just you wait. I'll go look for Master immediately. Even if Master cripples him, he can't fall into Yu Zhuochuan's hands." Of course, Zhang Ping'er was well aware of Yu Zhuochuan's feelings for her. Shi Mujuan had long noticed her feelings for Zhang Xiaohua, so Yu Zhuochuan must have known about it long ago. If Zhang Xiaohua were to challenge the peak, wouldn't she be falling into the tiger's mouth? Not even his bones would be left behind. Silly girl. Hanjuiqi grabbed Zhang Ping'er, who was about to run away, and scolded, "Ren Xiaoyao has already rushed up the main mountain path. He is a disciple of our mythical Flame Hall. Even if he is guilty of a crime, our mythical Flame Hall can't shirk the responsibility. Even the hall master might be punished by Lord Sect Leader. If you go and call Master over now, wouldn't you be pushing Master into a fire pit?" Zhang Ping'er was stunned. She didn't think so much and said with a bitter face, "Then, eldest senior sister, what do you think we should do now?" Hanjuiqi rolled her eyes and turned her head. She said to two disciples who were not far away, "You immediately inform the hall master and explain this matter to him." When one of the disciples heard this, he had a regretful look on his face. However, he still bowed and ran away. When that disciple was far away, Hanjuiqi said to the other disciple, "You, go and inform the vice hall master. Tell him that your senior sister Zhang and I will be following him. Yes, let me and eldest senior sister follow Ren Xiaoyao. Tell Master not to be anxious." Zhang Ping'er couldn't help but interrupt. Hanjuiqi glared at her and said to the disciple, "Okay, just say it like that. You can go." When that disciple was far away, Zhang Ping'er forced a smile and pulled Hanjuiqi, "Eldest senior sister, you are so nice. With you following me, I don't have to ask Master for a token." Hanjuiqi scolded with a smile, "Am I doing this for you? Master might be able to hide behind us, but we still need someone. It's better for me to follow you than for you to not be able to reach Lingering Fragrance Peak." After saying that, she looked around and saw that there were still many disciples who hadn't left. Most of them were the subordinates of the Distant Fire Hall Master. She couldn't force herself to give orders, so she ignored them and flew away to chase after them. Zhang Xiaohua borrowed Han Zhuqi's inner energy and flew away. He knew that this martial art would definitely subdue Han Zhuqi. He didn't even turn back and walked quickly to the main mountain path with his head held high. Zhang Xiaohua's emotions were surging and his blood was boiling. He wanted to use his sword to reach Lingering Fragrance Peak. However, after thinking about it, his mind was clear and he wasn't as impulsive as before. He had to break through Lingering Fragrance Peak. Otherwise, how could he see the dream and explain things clearly? As for this charge, it could only be done openly. Zhang Xiaohua also understood what the inner sect disciple had said. If he used the Imperial Wind technique or the Earth Escape technique, even if he reached the Lingering Fragrance Peak and saw the dream, what would happen after that? Wasn't he just an alchemy disciple of the distant fire hall? He would never be compatible with the dream. Even Zhang Pinger, in the eyes of others, was unworthy of her. Rather than that, he might as well do it openly and let others see that Zhang Xiaohua had the qualifications to be with the inner disciples of Mo Xian Palace. Of course, breaking through openly was also about technique. He definitely couldn't expose himself completely in front of the Lingering Fragrance cult. Zhang Xiaohua now wanted to use the reckless bull force and the 10,000 gene of strength in his arms to hide his other abilities. As for the other details, Zhang Xiaohua still didn't understand. Left and right, water and earth will be used to cover the earth. Soldiers will be used to block the enemy. Coincidentally, Zhang Xiaohua pretended that his Qinggong wasn't good enough and walked out of the distant fire hall's mountain path. When he reached the main mountain path of Lingering Fragrance Peak, he met a few patrolling disciples. Wasn't the person in front Zhang Xiaohua the first time he entered the Lingering Fragrance Peak's array, Senior Wei? The white-robed Senior Wei saw a tall and thin disciple walking out of the distant fire hall's mountain path. Although the disciple was holding a so-called long sword, he wasn't surprised. He only glanced at the disciple and continued walking. The distant fire hall's disciples weren't limited to the distant fire hall. They could go to other places as well. Who would keep an eye on them? However, Senior Brother Wei stopped after taking 2 steps. He only felt that this disciple was somewhat familiar. After pondering for a while, he recalled the matter of a few days ago. After all, the matter of Zhang Xiaohua breaking through the array was rare in the Lingering Fragrance Peak. Senior Brother Wei had specially reported this matter to the peak. When he thought of this, Senior Wei stopped. When he turned back to look, he realized that Zhang Xiaohua didn't walk down the mountain as he had expected. She didn't walk past the main mountain path and head to the opposite side. He couldn't help but frown. When Senior Wei stopped, the other disciples who were following him stopped as well. All of them stood there and watched Zhang Xiaohua walk up the mountain. Of course, if Zhang Xiaohua only walked up the mountain and didn't go beyond the boundary of the distant fire hall, they had no right to interfere. However, Zhang Xiaohua simply turned around the back of their heads and walked along the main mountain path, making a turn. Senior Wei couldn't help but turn to look at the other disciples. They were obviously confused. They had seen disciples with personalities before, but they had never seen someone with such a personality. She actually treated them as though they didn't exist. That's right. In the past, when they were patrolling the mountain, no matter if it was the distant fire hall, the Greenwood Hall, or the Ruoxue Hall's disciples would nod their heads when they saw her. What senior brother? Junior brother? Greet them. Let's go. Let's go take a look. Senior Wei made a prompt decision and chased after her. The others also followed closely behind. They wanted to see what was going on. However, when Senior Wei and the others took a few steps, 2 female disciples rushed out from the distant fire hall's mountain path. They weren't familiar with Zhang Pinger, but Han Zhuqi was. Senior Wei cupped his hands and asked, "Senior Sister Han, what are you doing? Are you going up the mountain for business?" Han Zhuqi was a little hesitant. She didn't know what to say when she saw Zhang Xiaohua disappear around the corner. Zhang Pinger said anxiously, "Junior brother, you saw a disciple with a long sword. Did he go out from here? Senior sister, are you with that junior brother of yours? He's heading up the mountain. Senior Marshal Brother Wei's face relaxed as he pointed upwards. When Han Zhuoqi heard this, she immediately waved her hand and said, Junior Brother Wei, how are we related to that person? We were just bored and walked around. We only saw that disciple just now. Senior Brother Wei immediately felt that something was amiss. A bad feeling immediately arose in his heart. Before he could ask further, he heard a deep, thunderous sound coming from the mountain path. This is. Senior Wei felt that this sound was extremely familiar, but he couldn't recall where it came from. At this time, a young disciple behind him whispered, why is this sound similar to the sound that came from the protective array when the divine lightning fell from the sky? Senior Wei's face instantly changed. The others beside him also blurted out, someone is trying to break into the protective array. After speaking, everyone ignored Han Zhuoqi and Zhang Ping'er as they executed their qinggong and headed up the mountain. At this moment, the disciples from the mythical Flame Hall who were watching the show also swarmed out from the mountain path. Senior Brother Wei and the others chased after them. Zhang Ping'er also immediately pulled Han Zhuoqi and followed closely behind. After everyone had passed through the bend, a slanted limestone mountain path appeared in front of them. A few hundred feet in front of them, a tall and skinny young man was holding a long sword in his hand. He was using all his strength to smash the long sword into an empty space on the mountain path. Every time he smashed the long sword, a splendor would burst forth from the empty space, and a buzzing sound would be emitted. Chapter 870. Senior Brother Wei was shocked and said angrily, you brat, what are you doing? Zhang Xiaohua turned around and smiled, revealing his white teeth. He looked very innocent. Senior brother, you're asking the obvious, right? Can't you see? I'm trying to break the array. I want to barge into Lingering Fragrance Peak. Zhang Xiaohua didn't say much and his voice wasn't loud. However, his words were like thunder in the ears of Senior Brother Wei and the rest. Barge into Lingering Fragrance Peak? This brat isn't joking, right? Ever since Senior Brother Wei, oh, no, these disciples of Rui Jin Hall were sensible, they had never heard of the phrase, barge into Lingering Fragrance Peak. Even after they became the peak protectors of Lingering Fragrance Peak, they had never thought that someone would barge into Lingering Fragrance Peak. Immediately, a disciple at the side laughed out loud, this junior brother, you're not running a fever, right? When these words came out, the few people at the side laughed as well. The shock on their faces lessened and the ridicule in their eyes increased by several degrees. Zhang Xiaohua didn't care about them. A look of disdain flowed out from his eyes. He held the long sword in his right hand and slashed at the array protecting the peak. This array protecting the peak was somewhat out of Zhang Xiaohua's expectations. Previously, Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohua didn't explain it clearly. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua thought that only the bottom of Lingering Fragrance Peak was protected by the array. When Zhang Xiaohua went up the medicinal herb garden in distant Fire Hall, he didn't see any array. Furthermore, Meng, Shimujuan, and the inner disciples came down casually. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua didn't know that there was an array protecting the main mountain path. It was only until he was blocked by the array that he found out. Presumably, from the bottom to the top of the Lingering Fragrance Peak, there must be a formation separating the area controlled by each hall. The token that Zhang Ping'er spoke of was certainly not only for the disciples guarding the peak to examine, but it was also used to pass through these formations. Zhang Xiaohua was blocked by the array. Naturally, he secretly released his hidden divine sense to take a look. This blocking array was very thin and its power was limited. If it was not for the lack of primordial qi, then it was because of the restriction inside the Lingering Fragrance Peak. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua could not directly use the Dharma incantation to break the array. He could only use the heavy sword in his hand to directly break the array. By the time Senior Brother Wei and the others came up, Zhang Xiaohua had already slashed several times with her sword. The array formation was already faintly broken. Just as everyone was mocking her, Zhang Xiaohua swung her sword. There was a tearing sound, like the sound of paper being torn. The scene in front of Zhang Xiaohua changed slightly. It was the obstructing array formation that had been torn apart. At this moment, senior brother Wei held his sword and quickly stepped forward. He berated, "Quickly stop. How can you forcefully break through this peak-protecting grand array? If there is anything, you should first report to your hall master." If Zhang Xiaohua only turned back to look at senior brother Wei. Without waiting for him to finish his words, he dove into the array formation in a flash. He was using his actions to tell him, "Don't say anything. This young master will definitely break through this lingering fragrance peak." Senior brother Wei's expression changed drastically. He did not expect that Zhang Xiaohua would really be able to break through this formation. He had only said those words earlier because he felt that something was amiss when he saw Han Zhuqi following behind. Hence, he said some polite words that would allow him to advance and retreat. Now that Zhang Xiaohua had already passed the boundary of the distant fire hall, how could he dare to hesitate any longer? He shouted loudly, "What are you laughing about?" After he finished speaking, he took the lead and chased after him. The others also suppressed their shock and chased after him with long swords in hand. At this moment, the disciples of the distant flame hall also caught up. However, they were pointing at the spot where Zhang Xiaohua was previously standing. Their faces were filled with excitement, but they did not dare to take another step forward. They watched helplessly as senior brother Wei and the others, as well as Han Zhuqi and Zhang Pinger, broke through the peak-protecting grand array. After Zhang Xiaohua passed through the array formation, the scene in front of him was not much different from the distant flame hall. He did not know which hall this was. He had only taken a few steps when senior brother Wei arrived and shouted, "You brat, eat my sword." After he said that, senior brother Wei spread his wings like a white crane and soared into the sky. The long sword in his hand pierced straight towards Zhang Xiaohua's back. Zhang Xiaohua had already sensed the level of senior brother Wei's martial arts when he was at lingering fragrance peak. Hence, when the tip of senior brother Wei's long sword was about to reach his body, his move was already over and there was no possibility for him to change his move. Only then did he turn around and raise the heavy sword in his hand, stiffly aiming at the tip of the long sword. What was Zhang Xiaohua planning to do now? Wasn't he preparing to use his strength to bully others? The two swords clashed and a crisp clang sounded. Senior brother Wei felt a huge force coming towards him. He was shocked, but before he could reveal the joy on his face, it was replaced by panic once again. He forcefully extracted his inner energy and sent it towards the long sword. Zhang Xiaohua took a step forward and stood at the place he was blocking. Then, she swung her sword to the right. It was the sword that the two disciples had used to stab at her. Seeing how powerful Zhang Xiaohua's heavy sword was, the two disciples panicked. Just as they were about to withdraw their swords, they saw a black shadow flash in front of them. Pang, pang. Two muffled sounds rang out. It was Zhang Xiaohua who kicked their shoulders. "Io!" They cried out in pain as they were kicked several feet away by Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua did not hesitate. She casually glanced at the last disciple standing not far away and rushed up the mountain. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Xiaohua easily forced the three disciples to retreat. Senior brother Wei's signal was still in the air. Han Zhuqi had just retracted her gaze when she saw that Zhang Xiaohua was already far away. Zhang Pinger's beautiful eyes had been following Zhang Xiaohua. When she saw that he had won so cleanly, she did not know if she should be happy or sad. Senior brother Wei was helpless. He waved his sword and said to the last disciple who was trembling in fear, "Quick, follow me." Zhang Xiaohua deliberately concealed her qinggong and did not go up the mountain quickly. Senior brother Wei caught up not long after. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly stopped running, scaring senior brother Wei and the other disciple into retreating a few steps. Zhang Xiaohua curled her lips and said, "Senior brother Wei, do you think you can stop me?" Senior Brother Wei gritted his teeth and stepped forward, saying, "It's my duty. Even if I can't stop you, I have to." "All right." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Then I will fulfill your wish." As he spoke, he swung the heavy sword again. As the heavy sword approached, the sound of the wind could be heard. Senior Brother Wei could not block it, so he could only dodge. However, the heavy sword was not as clumsy as other heavy weapons. It only paused in the air for a moment before changing direction and sweeping towards him. The speed at which it changed its move was even more nimble than other long swords. Senior Brother Wei stared at the heavy sword and was about to jump up when he suddenly felt a black shadow flash in front of him. He raised his head slightly and saw that Zhang Xiaohua had already closed in on him when he was not paying attention. Senior Brother Wei was shocked and was about to punch out with his other hand when Zhang Xiaohua raised her left hand again. She was extremely fast and nimble and tapped on a major acupoint on Senior Brother Wei's chest. "Senior Brother, do you admit defeat?" Zhang Xiaohua, who had defeated Senior Brother Wei several times, asked with a smile. Chapter 871. In fact, she didn't expect Senior Marshal Brother Wei to answer. Zhang Xiaohua reached out and rummaged through Senior Brother Wei's clothes. Not long after, he took out a token. Looking at it, he smiled and said, "This one has spared your life a few times. Consider this token the price I have to pay. Using a long sword to break the formation is really tiring." "You?" Senior Marshal Brother Wei couldn't move. He could only curse in his heart. "What about me?" Zhang Xiaohua glared at him. As if she could hear his thoughts, she raised her hand and curled her middle finger. Then, she stretched out her hand and flicked Senior Marshal Brother Wei's long sword. With a "kacha" sound, the fine steel sword broke into two pieces. "Let's see what else you have to fight with me." Zhang Xiaohua kicked Senior Marshal Brother Wei again and unsealed his acupoints. Then, she walked up the mountain without looking back. Senior Brother Wei flipped over and stood up. He was speechless as he looked at the half-broken sword in his hand. He raised his head and was about to speak when he saw a figure flying down from the mountain in front of him. The figure was as fast as lightning and looked like a goshawk. Before Senior Marshal Brother Wei could see who it was, he heard a thunderous roar. "What happened here? Who sent the emergency signal?" When Senior Marshal Brother Wei heard this, his face immediately lit up. He opened his mouth and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Hua, quick, it's right in front of you." Senior Apprentice Brother Wei had just called out Senior Apprentice Brother Hua when Senior Apprentice Brother Hua had already used his Qing Gong to appear in front of Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua had already raised his heavy sword and stabbed towards Senior Apprentice Brother Hua's lower dantian. Senior Marshal Brother Hua rushed down the mountain and didn't have time to see the situation. When he saw that Zhang Xiaohua was wearing an ordinary disciple's uniform, he didn't pay much attention to her. When Senior Marshal Brother Wei called out to him, he naturally looked down. If he didn't pay attention, Zhang Xiaohua's heavy sword would arrive in front of him. The heavy sword was very fast. When Senior Marshal Brother Hua noticed it, it was already too late. He hurriedly held his sword horizontally in front of him. Zhang Xiaohua didn't hold back and hit the middle of Senior Marshal Brother Hua's sword. "Kacha!" Senior Marshal Brother Hua's sword was even more miserable than Senior Marshal Brother Wei's. When Senior Marshal Brother Wei called out to him, Senior Marshal Brother Hua's sword was broken into pieces by Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua's heavy sword didn't lose its strength. Senior Marshal Brother Hua cried out and was sent flying by Zhang Xiaohua. He landed far behind Senior Marshal Brother Wei. Before Senior Marshal Brother Wei could finish his sentence, he saw Senior Marshal Brother Hua flying over his head. He tactfully swallowed the rest of his words. After hitting Senior Marshal Brother Hua to the ground, Zhang Xiaohua didn't turn back. She picked up her heavy sword and flew towards Lingering Fragrance Peak. Han Zhuoqi and Zhang Pinger were already numb. They looked at each other and chased after her. Before they could take a few steps, they heard someone in front of them shouting, "Eh! You are a disciple of Li Huahao? Could it be that you are challenging the array?" Unfortunately, before he finished speaking, a disciple who was guarding the peak was thrown in front of Zhang Pinger and senior marshal brother Hua. He was also holding a bare sword hilt. Senior marshal brother Hua and the disciple just now were looking at the sword hilt in their hands. They were extremely speechless. The peak-guarding disciples of Rui Jin Hall were undoubtedly the elites of Lingering Fragrance Peak's inner disciples. But after all, they had led a comfortable life for many years. Although they had some daily training, they had never expected that Zhang Xiaohua would challenge the array so suddenly. Although they reacted quickly, they couldn't form a battle array. They were beaten badly by Zhang Xiaohua's heavy sword. Fortunately, in Lingering Fragrance Peak's Rui Jin Hall, there wasn't a saying, "If the sword is there, the person is there." If the sword is destroyed, the person will forget. Otherwise, Zhang Xiaohua would have caused a huge disaster. Wouldn't all the low-level disciples of Rui Jin Hall have to find a crooked tree to end their own lives? Of course, although it wasn't that serious, these disciples couldn't help but feel sad. They couldn't help but find a huge rock and hide behind it to draw circles. Zhang Xiaohua fought all the way to the mountainside. Even he himself was puzzled. This Lingering Fragrance Peak seems to be too easy to challenge. It's not as strange as others say. Just as he was thinking, a dozen brocade-robed disciples appeared in front of him. The person in front was about 30 years old. He was dressed like a scholar and was different from the disciples beside him. This person was holding a flexible sword in his hand. His eyes were looking at Zhang Xiaohua, but his hand was shaking slowly. That flexible sword was twisting along with the scholar's hand like a snake. Seeing that the scholar was staring at him, Zhang Xiaohua didn't show any signs of weakness. He narrowed his eyes and looked straight at him. However, his feet didn't stop moving. He only stopped when he was close to him. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had stopped, that scholar looked up and down with interest. He then looked at the disciples behind Zhang Xiaohua who had their swords broken by him. With a pft sound, he laughed. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. He then heard that scholar pointing his finger and scolding, "Look at all of you, what have you become? The temple master has been telling all of you about your troubles every day, telling all of you to be vigilant in times of peace. Where did all of you listen to him? This. Luckily it's us Lihua temple disciples who challenged the mountain. If it was some Dalan temple or some Tenryu sect, would all of you still be alive?" Just as they were talking, a disciple at the side laughed, "Martial Uncle Ming, it's just a Lihua temple disciple. Let me teach him a lesson and take his dog life to appease Martial Uncle." "Shut up." Martial Uncle Ming originally had a smile on his face as he scolded the disciples. When he heard this, his eyebrows furrowed. What Lihua temple disciple, what dog life? Since he's a Lihua temple disciple, he's your junior. If his life is a dog life, what about yours? Don't tell me it's also a dog life? That disciple's face turned red and he didn't know how to answer. Foolish arrogance, foolish arrogance. Martial Uncle Ming pointed at the disciples and said, "Didn't you see? This Lihua temple disciple fought from the bottom of the mountain to the middle of the mountain. He broke everyone's long swords but did not even injure them. Is this control of strength something you can achieve? You still dare to boast shamelessly and teach them a lesson. It would be strange if you didn't get beaten to a pulp." When Martial Uncle Ming said this, the people at the side fell silent. Zhang Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry. He had fought from the bottom of the mountain to the middle of the mountain. Although he didn't meet any challenges, he had used up some energy. This was a good time for him to rest. After Martial Uncle Ming lectured the disciples, he smiled and said, "This brother from the Lihua temple, the disciple who reported the news just now came in a hurry and didn't say your name and the reason why you broke into the mountain. I think that since you're a Lihua temple disciple, you should know that breaking into the mountain is a serious crime. Since you want to break into the mountain, there must be a very important reason. If you can explain it clearly, maybe we can come up with a compromise. Maybe you don't need to break into the mountain. After that, he pointed behind him and said, I know that you have not met any powerful opponents since you came from the foot of the mountain. However, little brother should also know that these patrolling disciples are only the most ordinary disciples of my Ruijin palace. What about me? I'm also not the most powerful person in the Ruijin temple. Your journey up has been very difficult. Do you have the confidence to defeat all the disciples of my Ruijin temple? Seeing that the other party was so polite, Zhang Xiaohua also cupped his hands and said, Senior brother, I am Ren Xiaoyao, a disciple of the Lihua temple. I have no choice but to break into the mountain today. To be honest, senior brother might not know the reason behind it. When Martial Uncle Ming heard this, his face revealed an interested expression. Ren Xiaoyao, I will also tell you the truth. Whether you like to hear it or not, you are just a disciple of the Lihua temple. What kind of grievance could you have? Or what kind of matter would cause you to break into the mountain? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he looked up to the sky and laughed. That's right, I am just a small disciple of the Lihua temple. However, I want to break into the Lingxiang Peak today for no other reason than to meet a female disciple of the Mo Xian temple and have a few words with her. Martial Uncle Ming's face revealed an I understand expression. He looked at Zhang Xiaohua from top to bottom and almost gave him a thumbs up. He smiled and said, Little brother, you really want to. However, how would a disciple of the Mo Xian temple know you? Who is this disciple? You, what do you want to say to her? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and went all out. He said loudly, All right, since senior brother has asked, I want to borrow your mouth to pass this message to the peak of the Lingxiang Peak. I am breaking into the Mo Xian temple for no other reason than Miss Xixia. I want to say to her, the mountain has no edges, the heaven and earth merge, the winter thunder shakes the summer rain and snow, only then do I dare to break off from you. Zhang Xiaohua's voice was very loud and everyone heard it clearly. Martial Uncle Ming was even more shocked. What? Xixia? Xixia? Are you talking about the Xixia of the Mo Xian temple? Zhang Xiaohua smiled proudly. Yes, it is Xixia. How? Does senior brother know her? Or, is there someone called Shimujuan in your temple harassing my Xixia? When Martial Uncle Ming heard this, his face was full of bitterness. He lowered his head and said a few words to a disciple beside him. That disciple turned around and went up the mountain. Zhang Xiaohua ignored him. He waved his heavy sword and said, I've finished what I want to say. Senior brother? Can you let me pass? Martial Uncle Ming shook his head. I only wanted to advise you to put down your weapon. Since you have already said the reason, I think, you must also know that senior martial brother Shi is currently heading towards Mo Xian Palace. How can I ruin his good fortune? And, since that is the case, there is no point in saying anything more. Please. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she didn't say anything else. She took a big step forward and raised her heavy sword to stab towards Martial Uncle Ming's chest. Martial Uncle Ming saw that all the disciples' weapons were broken. Of course, Zhang Xiaohua's heavy sword was more powerful. However, he relied on his skills and boldness. He still circulated his inner energy and the flexible sword agilely rose up to meet Zhang Xiaohua's heavy sword. Tisk! The two swords collided. Just like the previous disciples, the flexible sword was filled with inner strength, but it was no match for the heavy sword, edgeless. It was sent flying back, stabbing towards Martial Uncle Ming's chest. Martial Uncle Ming sucked in a breath of cold air. Only now did he understand how much strength this seemingly ordinary disciple from the Firely Temple had. Only now did he understand why all the disciples were no match for him and their weapons were all broken. This wasn't just a simple numbing of the mind, it was a real difference in strength. Since when did the Firely Temple have such a powerful disciple? Martial Uncle Ming was very surprised. Chapter 872. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua deflect the tip of the flexible sword, Master Ming was surprised, but he did not panic. He lowered his body and pulled back his right hand, which was holding the sword. He spun the flexible sword in a circle, and like the Tenryu sect's Qin Shiryu, he slashed it diagonally towards Zhang Xiaohua's head. Zhang Xiaohua shouted and raised his heavy sword again, smashing it towards the middle of the flexible sword. This move was invincible just now, and all the disciples regretted it after being smashed by Zhang Xiaohua. However, martial Uncle Ming did not dodge and continued to slash at Zhang Xiaohua with his flexible sword. Just as the two swords were about to collide, he flicked his wrist and used the back of his sword to strike Zhang Xiaohua's heavy sword. The tip of the flexible sword curved like a venomous snake coming out of its hole and pecked at Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. This flexible sword was the nemesis of Zhang Xiaohua's heavy sword. Zhang Xiaohua had seen Peacock use the flexible sword when she was on the way to Chuanxiang cult. She had a good understanding of the weapon's characteristics, and Master Ming's move was within her expectations. Zhang Xiaohua raised her left hand and curled her middle finger, aiming at the tip of the sword. Pang! A huge force was transmitted to Master Ming's hand, and he was surprised. Is this internal energy? Or is it pure strength? The tip of the flexible sword was deflected by Zhang Xiaohua, and Zhang Xiaohua raised her left leg and kicked Master Ming's waist. Master Ming's lips curled into a smile and his left hand turned into a claw. Like an eagle's beak, he clawed at Zhang Xiaohua's ankle. This was the famous eagle claw technique. Although Zhang Xiaohua had tempered her bones with the fist of the North Star, she was not interested in using her own leg to test Master Ming's skill. She bent her leg and dodged the eagle's claw. Following that, she kicked out again. Master Ming calmly changed his claw into a fist and collided with Zhang Xiaohua's leg. With a muffled sound, Master Ming lost his balance and staggered a few steps back. His flexible sword was also deflected by Zhang Xiaohua's attack. Martial Uncle Ming finally put away the remaining contempt in his heart and treated this alchemy disciple from the distant fire hall as a true opponent. He really couldn't understand how a disciple from the distant fire palace could have such high martial arts. Moreover, the strength in his hands was simply unimaginable. If he hadn't used his internal energy and used all his strength to fight back, wouldn't he have been defeated in those few moves? At this moment, it was urgent, and Master Ming did not have time to think carefully. He roused his spirit and used all that he had learned in his life. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua, he also had a dignified expression. This Master Ming's martial arts were indeed high, and his inner energy was unparalleled. Especially his flexible sword moves, they often overturned common sense and attacked from unimaginable angles, causing Zhang Xiaohua to be in an extremely difficult situation. If it was a life-and-death battle, perhaps if there was no one around, Zhang Xiaohua would have already used the immortal Dao's magical powers to restrain him. It was a pity that Zhang Xiaohua only wanted to barge into Yixiang Peak and not to massacre Yixiang Peak. Hence, she could only use her heavy sword and sword techniques to fight. In the time it took to smoke a cigarette, Zhang Xiaohua was already in a bit of a pinch. Her back and shoulders had already been stabbed several times by the flexible sword. Fortunately, Zhang Xiaohua had the long robe to protect her body. Ignoring the immortal Dao's attacks, this simple martial arts attack was more than enough to deal with. When Master Ming saw that his flexible sword was ineffective, he thought that Zhang Xiaohua had practiced the body tempering technique. He was puzzled and looked for her weak point. Seeing that she was stabbed by the flexible sword, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was already impatient. She unconsciously released her spiritual sense and used her thumb and index finger to grab the tip of the flexible sword. It was as if a snake's weak point was grabbed. No matter how much strength Master Ming used, he could not pull the flexible sword out even half an inch. Master Ming was a little depressed. He forcefully channeled his inner energy and wanted to straighten the flexible sword. However, when his inner energy reached the tip of the sword, it was blocked. The entire flexible sword could not be straightened no matter what. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had a mischievous smile on her face and was about to exert more strength with her two fingers, Master Ming knew that things were not going well. His flexible sword was not an ordinary long sword. It was personally bestowed by the palace master of Ruijin Hall. It was a high-quality item found in the Heaven and Earth Hall's heavenly pavilion. If it was easily broken by Zhang Xiaohua. Not to mention how to deal with Zhang Xiaohua, even he himself would not be able to answer to the palace master. Wait! Just as Zhang Xiaohua was about to use the same trick again, Master Ming shouted, "Junior brother Ren, please wait." Zhang Xiaohua frowned and did not loosen her grip. She asked, "Senior brother, do you have any instructions? This round is considered your win." Junior brother Ren, I concede defeat. Just let go. Master Ming was extremely helpless. The feeling of not being able to take action for fear of breaking the vases was really uncomfortable. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned at first, but she immediately understood. She smiled and said, "Senior brother's martial arts are strong. Ren wants to learn from you. Wait until I break the tip of this flexible sword, then I will fight with you for 300 rounds. Wait. Master Ming knew that Zhang Xiaohua was merciless. Otherwise, she would not have broken the swords of all the disciples. Hence, he hurriedly shouted, "Junior brother Ren, your martial arts are strong. I am really not your opponent. You should let go of my flexible sword." He. Zhang Xiaohua laughed evilly, "I can let go of it. However, is there any benefit in doing so?" Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have tasted the sweetness of a deal behind the scenes. She laughed. "You." Master Ming almost fainted. His martial arts were obviously higher than Yi Lingchen's and his swordsmanship was also exquisite. However, he was not strong enough and was caught off guard. It was fine if he let Yi Lingchen go, but Yi Lingchen actually wanted to raise some conditions. Master Ming gritted his teeth and said, "Junior brother Ren, don't push me too far. Even a rabbit will bite when cornered." Zhang Xiaohua's right hand twirled the 10,000 Jin sword like it was a piece of straw. She only smiled and said, "This sword of mine is used to kill rabbits that love to eat the grass around their nest." "What the? I'm not the one eating the grass around your nest." Master Ming felt a headache coming on. This was obviously a case of jealousy. Although the difference in status between the two of them was too great, and one of them was his senior brother, but he was just an innocent bystander. "Even if your city gate is on fire, don't implicate me, alright? You. What do you want to say? I'll listen here first. If you want to force me, then don't blame me for abandoning this flexible sword and fighting you to the end." Master Ming said righteously. Well said, well said." Zhang Xiaohua squinted her eyes and looked behind Master Ming for a long time. She then smiled and said, "Actually, Ren's suggestion is for everyone's good. I know that you have your duty and have no choice but to stop me. However, I must break through the mountain today. So, you just stand aside and let me go up the mountain." "Go," Master Ming said angrily, "if we let you go up, do we still have any face? You have the nerve to say such words? Forget it, forget it. You still broke my flexible sword. Even if I have to risk the scolding of the palace master, I will use the power of the entire palace to stop you." "Who's afraid of who?" Zhang Xiaohua said disdainfully, "I'm just afraid of hurting the innocent. I'll break the weapons of your Ruijin Palace's disciples and make things difficult for Qiankuan Hall." Seeing that they couldn't come to an agreement, the two of them frowned at the same time. Master Ming's eyes turned quickly. He was at a disadvantage at this time. Zhang Xiaohua was barefooted and wasn't afraid of wearing shoes. She was also breaking through the mountain. "How about this?" Master Ming thought for a while and said, "Junior brother Ren's martial arts are outstanding. To be honest, the ordinary disciples of Ruijin Palace are definitely not your opponent. If you force them to fight, it'll just be a joke. Our Ruijin Palace also wants face. In order to respect you, a rare opponent, we won't have the idea of winning with numbers." "That's great." Zhang Xiaohua almost wanted to clap her hands. Junior brother Ren is very brave. He has already broken through the deep earth palace from the distant fire palace at the foot of the mountain. He is now in the territory of the Greenwood Palace. Behind him are the Soft Water Palace, Ruijin Palace, and Mo Xian Palace. If you win, I will send you through the restriction of the Greenwood Palace. Then, my Ruijin Palace's disciples will no longer obstruct you along the way. We will only send our elite disciples to the restriction of the Soft Water Palace, Ruijin Palace, and Mo Xian Palace. If you win, you will pass. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. Are you serious? Master Ming proudly said, I am on duty today. Naturally, I have the final say. Okay. Zhang Xiaohua loosened her hand and said with a smile, I'll believe you this time. Master Ming put away his flexible sword and said, however, I still have a condition. Zhang Xiaohua's face changed and said angrily, I believe you. You dare to trick me? Where? Uncle Master Ming explained, Junior apprentice brother Ren is very brave. You managed to rush halfway up the mountain in such a short period of time. I was a little careless. If you challenge the formation, you have to sit on the bench for a while. Zhang Xiaohua pondered for a moment and said with a smile, Ren originally thought that he had taken advantage of me. But now, it seems that he was schemed against by senior brother Ming. A gentleman keeps his word. I'll do as you say. This time, Zhang Xiaohua had fallen into martial Uncle Ming's trap. With Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts, if she didn't reveal her ethereal steps and only used ordinary qinggong, it wouldn't take her much time to reach Mo Xian Palace. Although she encountered many ordinary disciples of Ruijin Hall, they were just ants. How could they shake Zhang Xiaohua's wheels? It was just a matter of wasting more effort and making people draw more circles. The elites of Ruijin Palace, those whose martial arts were on par with martial Uncle Ming or even more powerful than martial Uncle Ming, might not be able to make it in time because they were not on duty. With martial Uncle Ming's arrangement, Zhang Xiaohua only needed to pass through 3 checkpoints to reach Mo Xian Palace. However, he would have to spend a lot of time. Ruijin Palace could also calmly make arrangements and bring out powerful opponents. They used 3 disciples with great martial arts to replace hundreds of ants. Who was more important and who was more important? Everyone could see it clearly. It was a pity that Zhang Xiaohua's experience in the pugilistic world was still shallow. She only wanted to relax, but she fell into a trap. Calm, there are more chapters. Chapter 873. On lingering Fragrance Peak, in the Heritage Palace, there was no sign of anyone outside the Heritage Chamber. Nun Jingyi was not waiting here. Inside the Heritage Chamber, Peacock, Chen Chen, and Swift were no longer in the study. Beside the study, behind the wall that emitted a faint white glow was a large space. In this space, the mountain walls in all directions were inlaid with luminous pearls, like stars in the sky, illuminating the space. Under the starry sky, Peacock, Chen Chen, and Swift each sat cross-legged in a position with their palms facing the sky and their eyes closed in silence. Everything looked tranquil. However, under the light of the night pearl, the seemingly dark mountain wall was inlaid with many stones of different colors and sizes. Although these stones of different colors covered the entire mountain wall, they were extremely neat. The stones of different colors might be of the same color together, or they might be of different colors. However, if one were to take a closer look, they would not be able to see anything. Although these stones did not emit a dazzling brilliance and were covered by the luminous pearls, after looking at them for a long time, one would naturally know that these stones were the rulers of this starry sky. Peacock closed her eyes as she sat below a fiery red rock. Her face was slightly impatient. She was following the instructions in the introductory chant of the Art of Developing Ice, to adjust her breathing. She opened all the pores on her body and tried again and again to feel the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the secret chamber. Unfortunately, it was already the 13th day and there was still no effect. The yuan qi of heaven and earth mentioned in the mental cultivation method was not only not absorbed into her body, she could not even feel it. Could it be that I'm not fated to be an immortal? Peacock was not anxious. She opened her eyes slightly and looked at Chen Chen and Swift, who were sitting not far in front of her. The three of them had already chosen the cultivation method they wanted to cultivate on the very first day they entered the secret chamber. The thin booklet only recorded the introductory chant, which was not difficult for these talented people. Although the chant was obscure and the method was unimaginable, they were able to comprehend it in just one day. After Peacock crossed the glowing white wall, Chen Chen and Swift followed suit. Peacock heaved a sigh of relief when she saw that Chen Chen and Swift were frowning as well. It looks like I'm not the only one who doesn't understand and can't sense any worldly energy. Even my two junior sisters aren't making any progress. The cultivation of the path of immortality is truly unimaginable. It actually absorbs primordial qi from heaven and earth to temper one's meridians. Compared to the path of martial arts, which uses one's own hard work to generate internal energy, this is 100 times stronger. Yes, it should be 10,000 times stronger. No matter how tough a person's meridians are, there is always a limit to the amount of internal energy they can generate. However, there is an infinite amount of elemental energy in the world. Immortal Tao techniques can be absorbed from the outside world like drinking water. Of course, martial arts can't compare. Moreover, Immortal Tao cultivation techniques can mobilize heaven and earth yuan qi to be used for attack and defense. They are extremely powerful, and it is even possible to move mountains and drain seas. It is truly not something that martial Tao can compare to. However, it is precisely because Immortal Tao relies on external forces and is heavily dependent on the external environment. If there is a great change in heaven and earth yuan qi, just like what Master said, the heaven and earth yuan qi can no longer be used since 10,000 years ago. It is so thin that it can no longer be absorbed. This directly led to the destruction of Immortal Tao. But the path of immortality has been destroyed for 10,000 years. How can Incense sect pass down the path of immortality? How can we sense the heaven and earth yuan qi in this secret room and even absorb the first strand of heaven and earth yuan qi into our bodies? With this thought in mind, Peacock turned her gaze to the colorful stones on the stone wall above her. This is the so-called primordial stone. I remember when I entered the Valley of Dusk a few years ago, Master gave me a piece and told me to use it carefully. When I returned from the Valley of Dusk, he took it back. Peacock instantly understood. The primordial stone embedded on the stone wall above her head was the key to passing down the legacy of Incense sect. There must be something fishy about the way these primordial stones were embedded. Formation. These two words inadvertently flashed across Peacock's mind. That's right, it is a formation. Isn't the illusion formation in the refining heart cave an array? Even though I can't see how the array was set up, the refining heart cave must have been set up with primordial stones. But what kind of formation was set up with so many primordial stones? Peacock was perplexed. What kind of magical formation could allow someone who has never sensed the heaven and earth yuan qi to absorb the first strand of heaven and earth yuan qi from this secret room? It should be when the heaven and earth yuan qi is thin. It allows the disciples of lingering fragrance peak to absorb the heaven and earth yuan qi through normal means, just like when Immortal Tao flourished. With this thought, Peacock frowned. She seemed to recall her master talking to her about this before. But it was so long ago, how could she remember clearly? Sigh, it seems like I still don't have the aptitude to cultivate Immortal Tao techniques. Peacock sighed. Even at such a crucial moment, I can't believe I'm still thinking about such boring things. As she sighed, Peacock was about to look away when suddenly she seemed to have noticed something. Her eyes widened. There are so many primordial stones on this stone wall. It feels like there are many colors. But if I look closely, there should be 6 colors. Oh, no, it should be 5 colors. With this thought, Peacock was enlightened. 5 Elements Spirit Gathering Formation. Yes, it's the 5 Elements Spirit Gathering Formation. Master mentioned before that using the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth yuan qi can be set up into a magical formation. It gathers the heaven and earth yuan qi in the formation, causing the heaven and earth yuan qi to be several times thicker than the outside. That must be it. Now that the heaven and earth yuan qi is so thin, only the 5 elements spirit gathering formation can gather the thin heaven and earth yuan qi together. It's almost as thick as when immortal Tao was at its peak. Only this way can disciples like us who have no foundation in immortal Tao be able to sense the heaven and earth yuan qi. After that, Peacock understood everything. The 5 elements spirit gathering formation is set up with primordial stones of 5 different elements. Under the primordial stones of different elements, the concentration of heaven and earth yuan qi of different elements must be different. Ice developing technique, although I don't know how it's recorded in the back, but from the name, it's a water-type technique. Peacock looked up and saw the fiery red primordial stones above her. She smiled bitterly. The fiery red primordial stones are probably of the fire attribute. I'm practicing water-type techniques under these fire attribute primordial stones, how can I succeed? She then looked up and saw that there was a light blue primordial stone opposite her. Chen Chen was sitting under it. Peacock knew what kind of technique Chen Chen and Yu Yen were using. It was the blazing heart technique. Needless to say, just based on the word flame, it should be a fire-based technique. Chen Chen was also sitting under the water primordial stone. How could he succeed? She then looked at Swift. She chose star slashing technique. If she was not wrong, it should be a metal attribute technique. Above Swift's head, there were a few different types of primordial stones, but there was no gold primordial stone. No wonder. Peacock was enlightened, but then she was puzzled. The leader must know about this. Why didn't she remind us before we entered the secret room? Could it be that there's something? Peacock did not want to think any further. After all, the leader always had a reason for everything she did. There was no reason for her to explain it to her. More importantly, the time was almost up. If she could not sense the heaven and earth yuan qi in a few more days and could not absorb it into her body, then the inheritance would be a failure. Peacock did not hesitate to get up. The moment she got up, Chen Chen and Swift opened their eyes. Chen Chen was shocked. "Senior, you've entered the sect so quickly." Swift did not speak, but her eyes were filled with envy. Peacock said impatiently, "It's not that fast." Then she walked in front of Chen Chen and said, "I'll sit here, you, go sit beside me." Chen Chen had always listened to Peacock since he was young. Without hesitation, he got up. Peacock and Chen Chen switched places and both of them closed their eyes. Swift saw this and her eyes were filled with confusion. She stared at the two of them for a while before she closed her eyes. At this time, Peacock smiled and said, "Swift, go sit over there." As he spoke, he pointed at a spot below a golden origin stone. Swift was stunned and did not know what to do. She looked at Peacock, who had closed her eyes expressionlessly. Swift saw that Chen Chen also had his eyes closed and her heart skipped a beat. She was different from Peacock and Chen Chen. Priestess Shui was also different from Priestess Jing Fan. Therefore, she knew much less about the sect's secrets. Since the two of them had switched places, they must have discovered something. It would be fine if they did not tell her, but since they did, it must be beneficial to her. She had been sitting here for more than 10 days and had not made any progress. Perhaps Peacock was right. Swift was an intelligent person. To be able to stand out in the selection, how could she be a simple person? Once she understood, she immediately got up and moved to the spot below the gold primordial stone. The three of them started again. In Imo Xian's palace, Priestess Jing Yi took out a scroll and read it carefully. As she was reading, she sighed for no reason and put the scroll on the table. She floated up and walked slowly to the palace gate. She looked up at the sun that was close to noon and sighed. It's already the 17th day. If he doesn't come out tomorrow, this inheritance will be considered a failure. The selection is already so difficult, the inheritance of the incense sect. It's hard to say what will happen in the future. At this time, she heard footsteps in the distance. Could it be that someone has come out? Priestess Jing Yi looked up and her face was immediately filled with disappointment. The person who came was none other than the head of Ruijin Palace, Great Elder Jing Gang. Seeing Great Elder Jing Gang's happy face, Priestess Jing Yi was puzzled. She went up and smiled. Great Senior Sister, is there any good news? Priestess Jing Gang did not neglect her. She first saluted and then said, Great Leader, what do you think of the matter I told you before? Chapter 874. Hearing Nun Jing Gang's question, Nun Jing Yi was taken aback and asked in bewilderment, what is eldest senior sister talking about? It's about Mu Jun and Zixia. Nun Jing Gang wasn't displeased at all and only smiled apologetically. You also know that my eldest disciple has always had very high standards and has never placed ordinary women in his eyes. He's already so old, yet he's still alone. But this Zixia is his fate. Ever since he met her by chance, he couldn't forget her no matter what. After I told Sir Cult Master last time, I also told him to wait a little longer and listen to Sir Cult Master's arrangements, but... Nun Jing Yi slapped her forehead and said very apologetically, eldest senior sister, look at me, I'm really sorry. I've been busy with the direct selection and inheritance these days. Nun Jing Gang smiled. I know that Sir Cult Master has many matters to attend to and is also the key to the direct selection and inheritance, but this child Mu Jun has waited for so long, and is too embarrassed to come himself, so he urged me to come and ask Sir Cult Master. It's very normal for men and women to love each other. Nun Jing Yi said with a smile. However, immediately after, there was some difficulty on her face and she said, I understand Mu Jun's thoughts. When eldest senior sister mentioned it to me, I immediately asked Zixia about it. But this girl's character is extremely stubborn, and junior sister Jing Xian isn't here, so I can only ask for her own opinion. She doesn't seem to be interested in Mu Jun, so I can't make things too difficult for her. However, I saw that she wasn't in a good mood those days, so perhaps she didn't consider this matter too much. It just so happened that the Yulon Valley was refined, so I agreed to let her go with that girl Chen Chen to the Yulon Valley. Who knew that they would encounter the yellow wind wreaking havoc? It was really dangerous. I reckon that after going through the test of life and death, Zixia will have a new understanding of life, and perhaps it can change some of her ideas. Nun Jing Gang was overjoyed and said with a smile, I was wondering why Sir Cult Master didn't mention it again. It turns out that you've made so many arrangements. Perhaps Sir Cult Master's arrangements have taken effect, that girl Zixia has relented. Mu Jun is wild with joy and has asked me to ask Sir Cult Master, What? Nun Jing Yi also smiled and said, your family's Mu Jun is really something, to actually be able to make Zixia relent. This sect still congratulates eldest senior sister in advance. It's nothing, it's nothing. Abbess Jing Gang was also happy. Unfortunately, Nun Jing Yi added, but eldest senior sister, you know the rules of the incense order. The purple cloud beard is voluntary. If you force her, don't blame me, how could that be? Nun Jing Gang smiled and said, I'm the great elder of our fragrant cult. I still remember these rules. That's good. Nun Jing Yi nodded. If you have time, you should teach Yu Zhuqian a lesson. He's too much. Jing Gang said with an embarrassed expression, of course, of course. When Zhuqian returns, I will immediately inform him of Lord Hierarch's intentions. Come back. Where did he go? Nun Jing Yi was stunned. I don't think I sent him out. Nun Jing Gang became even more embarrassed. This brat disappeared the last time he came back from outside. I don't know where he went either, Nun Jing Yi sneered. You better find him properly. If anything happens, I won't be lenient. Of course, of course. Nun Jinggang almost wanted to wipe away the sweat on her forehead. However, Nun Jingyi smiled. Let's go. Let's go see Zixia and see what she's thinking. Inside Imo Xian's palace, in a secluded courtyard, in a seemingly simple living room, Meng Zheng had her head lowered. Her eyes were looking at the floor that seemed to be made of limestone, but was actually made of green jade. She was lost in thought, her expression a little worried. Even the slender fingers that were exposed outside of her palace robes were motionless. Although the person in the dream was not extremely beautiful, her eyes, her face, and her somewhat elegant, somewhat sorrowful, somewhat resentful, and somewhat noble temperament all made her an unforgettable beauty. Of course, this beauty wasn't the usual kind of beauty, so not everyone could appreciate it. However, as long as one could see the meaning behind it, they would be intoxicated. Shi Mujuan, who was sitting on the other side of the room, was supposed to be sitting upright and looking straight ahead. However, he couldn't help but look sideways at Meng Zheng's neck, beautiful hair, and slightly furrowed brows. Then, he realized that he had lost his composure and hurriedly retracted his gaze. However, after a while, he couldn't help but turn his head again. Where was the arrogant attitude that he usually had in Rui Jin Palace? After a while, Shi Mujuan couldn't help but whisper, "Junior sister Zixia, you have to tell me the truth, right? As soon as I received your message, I immediately rushed over. You also know that when I first saw junior martial sister Zixia, I was stunned by her beauty and thought that she was a marriage arranged by the heavens. That's why I've been pestering Master in order to tie the knot with her. Junior sister Zixia might not know about the hardships I've gone through during this period of time, but it's only now that I know what it means to be unable to sleep or eat well. When I open my eyes, I see junior sister Zixia's smile. When I close my eyes, I see junior sister Zixia's worried face. How can I let go of this? I asked Master to ask Master for help, but there was no news. Just as I was feeling anxious and heartbroken, perhaps the heavens were moved by my infatuation, I actually received a message from junior sister Zixia. It's really so emotional that I can't express it with words. This is the precious purple phoenix hairpin that Master bestowed upon me in the early years. It's a famous item in our immortal Tao sect. It's my keepsake, please accept it. When Meng heard this, her face became even paler. The fingers on her right hand kept rubbing the ring on her left hand's ring finger. She gritted her teeth, not knowing how to open her mouth. Seeing that Meng was a little nervous, Shi Mujuan smiled. Junior sister Zixia, I know that junior sister Zixia doesn't have anyone to rely on lingering fragrance peak. Now, other than you, the Shirtai has a registered disciple that I've never met before. If junior sister Zixia has anything to say today, please tell me. No matter what it is, as long as it's within my power, I'll agree. Meng raised her head slightly and glanced at him with her beautiful eyes. She said indifferently, no matter what it is. Senior brother Shi's tone is a little too arrogant. Shi Mujuan smiled. Junior sister Zixia's request is my lifelong wish. I'll work my heart out and I'll definitely achieve junior sister Zixia's wish. Then, he hesitated slightly. I won't hide it from junior sister Zixia. Perhaps I'm sometimes lacking in power, but I still have Master and Master. As long as junior sister Zixia speaks, there's nothing that can stop me, Master. When Meng heard this, she immediately understood. Her face was slightly angry. Senior martial brother Shi, little sister called you over to talk to you in advance. I wanted to listen to what you had to say. You? How did you alarm Jinggang Shirtai? And Master too? You're obviously forcing me, aren't you? Shi Mujuan panicked. He immediately stood up and bowed to the ground. Junior sister Zixia, you've misunderstood me. Meng said coldly, what's there to misunderstand? I only asked you to come over and talk. You've already taken the token and even Master has been alerted. What else is there to talk about? Shi Mujuan shook his head. I brought the token over to express my confidence. I've also asked the Lord Temple Master and Master to come over to express my determination. I'll definitely agree to any conditions that junior sister Zixia raises. Even if I can't agree at that time, the Lord Temple Master and Master are my witnesses. I swear that I'll fulfill them. Meng was disappointed. She waved her hand and said, Senior brother Shi, please take a seat. She then looked at the sky outside and let out a long sigh. Actually, I won't hide it from senior brother Shi. I already have someone else in my heart. Shi Mujuan had just sat down. When he heard this, he immediately stood up and said in surprise, What? Then. Junior sister Zixia. Meng smiled miserably. It actually made Shi Mujuan's heart ache. He felt as if a sharp knife was gently cutting his heart. He heard the dream say, originally, I didn't consider senior martial brother Shi. Although Lord Sect Leader asked me earlier, but Meng seemed to be unable to continue. Shi Mujuan smiled and said, It's alright, junior sister Zixia. Since we've already talked about it, there's nothing to hide. I'm very curious. Which disciple on Lingering Fragrance Peak can actually catch junior sister Zixia's eye? Even I can't compare. Then, his expression suddenly changed. Could it be my third junior brother? I haven't seen him for a long time. Could it be that he's avoiding me? Pfft, Meng laughed. Everything paled in comparison. Shi Mujuan was stunned. Senior brother Shi, you're so imaginative. Meng smiled and said, I have seen your junior brother twice, and he seems to have never put me in his eyes. Senior brother Shi is praising me too much, and only senior brother Shi would take a fancy to someone like me who has the appearance of a willow tree. Shi Mujuan smiled. That's because they have no taste. How could they understand junior sister Zixia's beauty? Meng was unhappy when she heard this. She said faintly, Beauty is but a stinky skin. After the mortal world, it'll turn into dust. Shi Mujuan did not reply. After a while, he probed, Junior sister Zixia, who is the one who made junior sister Zixia more depressed than me? Meng shook her head. You don't know him. He is just an ordinary person. Even if he was placed in front of you, you wouldn't look him in the eye, an ordinary person. Shi Mujuan smiled. I was wondering. So it's an old acquaintance from before you came to spread the incense order. Then I won't be jealous anymore. I didn't get to participate in junior sister Zixia's previous life. In the future, junior sister Zixia will have my shadow around you. Shi Mujuan's words were rather frivolous. He was revealing his true feelings. Unfortunately, Meng did not seem to hear him. She mumbled, Yes, it's an old acquaintance, an old memory that's engraved in my heart. You know it's impossible. Why did you let me meet him? Meng's expression clearly indicated that she was thinking about someone. Shi Mujuan's heart was filled with jealousy. The fire in his heart rose high, but he continued to smile. Junior sister, memories can only be memories. As living people, we have to face life. We have to look forward to everything. Chapter 875. That's right, that's right. Living in this world, we have to look forward to everything, but how can there be such a thing as you wish? Is it something you can forget just because you want to? Her words were melancholy, but Shi Mujuan's heart was moved. Meng's frown revealed that kind of aura without reservation, and Shi Mujuan really had no way to resist it. Shi Mujuan's heart ached for no reason, and he almost stood up. He said righteously, Junior sister Zixia's worries are my worries as well. Please tell me honestly, junior sister Zixia. Although I don't have the absolute authority of the sect leader, I still have some say in the general affairs of Lingering Fragrance Peak. Meng glanced at him and forced a smile. I also fancy senior brother's position. So, I hope senior brother won't blame me. Of course not. Shimujuan patted his chest and laughed. A man's shoulders are meant to shelter a woman from the wind and rain. If you're really thin and weak, it's better if you don't rely on me. Then, he changed the topic. Junior Marshall's sister has told me about her past without hesitation. If I don't take out the magnanimity of a man, how can I live up to Junior Marshall's sister's image in your heart? Meng smiled when she heard that, revealing the only dimple on her left cheek. It was really beautiful. Since senior apprentice brother she has said so, then little sister won't be courteous. Actually, I presume that senior apprentice brother she already had a plan in mind before coming here. Little sister is in this lingering fragrance peaks Emo Sua Palace. What kind of difficult matter could little sister encounter? Isn't it still the matter of my master, Shirtai? When Shimujuan heard this, he also had a card up his sleeve. He nodded and said, this humble one has known Abbess Jing Xian since young. When I was young, I also received a lot of guidance from her. Her sudden passing has indeed caused this humble one to be extremely sad and indignant. That's right. Master has passed away for a long time, but there's still no clue about the culprit who killed her. As her only disciple, I feel even more guilty. Shimujuan licked his lips and said, the Shirtai incident. I personally investigated it back then, but the culprit was truly cunning. He didn't even leave a single trace behind. It wasn't that I didn't try my best, but, other than Shirtai's normal expression and slightly surprised appearance, I really couldn't find anything. Later on, this matter was handed over to my master. It seems that Lord Sect Leader has personally investigated it as well, but he didn't succeed. Indeed. Meng's eyes seemed to have some tears. Master just left like this without a clear reason. He didn't say anything and didn't leave anything behind. Even if little sister wanted to fight for Master's justice with her life, it wouldn't work. Tell me. Senior brother am I not very competent as a disciple? Shimujuan comforted her, don't think too much, junior sister Xia. As a disciple, you should avenge your master, but, if you don't have the power, you can't force it. Lord Sect Leader has arranged everything, junior sister, you don't have to worry too much. Senior brother, even though you say that, you should know that master. She seems to have been harmed by someone very close to her. If Lord Sect Leader knows some secrets, shut up, junior sister Xia. Are you out of your mind? Shimujuan looked outside in a panic and said, Lord Sect Leader has her own arrangements. As disciples, we should just follow and watch. Meng stubbornly raised her head and sneered, Senior Marshal brother this little sister originally thought that you were an unyielding man, so I entrusted my heart to you. I even wanted to entrust my future to you, but this little sister has yet to speak a few words of truth. Could it be that Senior Marshal brother is afraid? This. Shimujuan scratched his head, Junior sister Xia, you can't say that. Back then, I was also personally involved in the Shirtai incident. However, there was something fishy about it and there were no clues at all. You can't blame Lord Sect Leader for this. Senior brother, you still don't understand little sister's heart. Little sister didn't say that Lord Sect Leader had done this. I just thought that with Lord Sect Leader's wisdom, how could this matter have been dragged on for so many years? If Lord Sect Leader had put her heart into it, wouldn't the truth have come to light long ago? Furthermore, I see that Lord Sect Leader is very busy. I'm afraid that Lord Sect Leader has long forgotten about my master's incident. This. Shimujuan was even more at a loss for words. Meng's words were all pointing towards Lord Sect Leader's indifference towards the Shirtai incident. How could he say anything else? That's why little sister had asked senior brother to come over because of this matter. Meng finally spoke the words in her heart. I'm somewhat prepared. Shimujuan nodded and said, Junior sister Xia is pledging her heart to me because she wants to borrow my power and identity to get to the bottom of the truth about Shirtai's murder. Meng nodded, if senior brother feels wronged, then just pretend that little sister didn't say anything. Shimujuan said in a low voice, I've already thought about junior sister Xia's words. If it wasn't for this matter, why would junior sister bother with me? Although this is indeed unfair to me, but who asked me to be so dead set on liking junior sister? I only hope. I hope that junior sister will stop thinking about other people once she's with me. Meng smiled bleakly. Senior brother do you think that little sister still has the face to see him after doing such a thing? Although she didn't specify who he was, Meng's sad expression was obvious. Shi Mujuan felt as if his heart had been bitten by a bug. Shi Mujuan was overjoyed and said, then. Junior sister Xia, please accept this purple phoenix hairpin. Meng looked at the incense cult's 10,000-year-old treasure on the table. She didn't seem to think that it was more precious than the hairpin on her hair. She raised her hand and felt as if she had lost the right to see him forever if she took the purple phoenix hairpin. Even though she had already made up her mind to sacrifice herself for her master's blood feud, even though she had already sent someone to tell him that she didn't want to see him ever again, how could she not be worried when he was so close to her? How could she forget about him so casually? Just as Meng wanted to raise her hand but didn't want to, she forced herself to do so. Suddenly, she heard a cold snort from outside the room. Audacious girl. Lingxiang Peak, Inheritance Palace, Peacock, Chen Chen and Swift were still sitting cross-legged in the Inheritance secret chamber. However, their expressions were much more serene than before and they weren't as anxious as they were a few days ago. Peacock was sitting right under the light blue water elemental stone. Although she could not sense any elemental chi of heaven and earth when she extended her perception outside, but this tranquil cultivation made her feel a sense of joy in her heart. She liked it very much. It had been a few days since Peacock and the rest switched places. It was not far from the 18th day, but Peacock had a feeling in her heart, a feeling that things were going to succeed. It was a feeling that was hard to fathom. Peacock's perception was wandering aimlessly outside. Suddenly, Peacock had a feeling that her soul was blessed. She thought of something that the cult leader once said: everyone else was honing their state of mind in the refining heart cave. You guys are lucky to have mastered the mortal heart technique in the refining heart cave. With such luck, the probability of inheriting the immortal heart technique has increased by 50%. It's because the mortal heart technique has been mastered that the probability of inheriting the immortal heart technique is increased. Does this mean that the mortal heart technique is related to the path of immortality? Once I entered the inheritance secret chamber, I threw the mortal heart technique to the back of my mind. What a waste! But what does the mortal heart technique have to do with the ice developing incantation? As she pondered, Peacock thought of Zhang Xiaohua and the heavenly Tao that Zhang Xiaohua manifested in the refining heart cave. She also thought of the heavenly Tao that the heavenly Tao manifested. Suddenly, Peacock thought of the inheritance secret chamber and the colorful elemental stones. Immediately, Peacock's perception formed the childish trajectory of the heavenly Tao. She tried to connect the stars in the refining heart cave with the stars in the inheritance secret chamber. Peacock's thought was not a big deal. It was a sign of the formless nature of the great Tao. She turned herself into a formless being without the elemental energy of heaven and earth. In an instant, the elemental energy in the inheritance secret chamber, the water elemental energy, was the most prominent. They all flowed into Peacock's formless body. At this time, Peacock had already sensed the heavenly Tao. She slowly simulated the heavenly Tao in her mind. She did not feel much about the elemental energy entering her body. It was as if this was a matter of course. Because of this unintentional absorption of elemental energy was similar to the absorption of elemental energy in Zhang Xiaohua's body when she was unconscious. From wisps to wisps, and then to waves, the elemental energy was guided by Peacock's perception. They were all absorbed into the pores of Peacock's body. Peacock's absorption of elemental energy had triggered a change in the elemental energy in the inheritance secret chamber. All kinds of elemental energy changed their original trajectory and drifted toward Peacock. Chen Chen and Swift originally did not have any perception of the elemental energy of heaven and earth. They were unable to absorb the elemental energy out of thin air. Peacock's breakthrough allowed them to sense the elemental energy of heaven and earth. Both of them had cultivated the traditional immortal path. Since they could sense the elemental energy of heaven and earth, it was not difficult for them to absorb elemental energy into their bodies. Therefore, when Peacock absorbed most of the elemental energy in the inheritance secret chamber into her body, Chen and Swift happily split the remaining elemental energy into two. After an unknown amount of time, the elemental energy in the inheritance secret chamber began to thin and could no longer withstand the absorption of the three of them. All the primeval stones on the ceiling of the inheritance secret chamber were dull without exception. They were no longer as bright as they were when the three of them entered. Suddenly, the peacock opened its eyes. Its gaze was not much different from before, but upon closer inspection, there was a trace of pride and joy in its eyes. At the same time, Chen and Swift also opened their eyes. They looked at each other and immediately stood up. They bowed and said, "Thank you, senior sister, for your help." Peacock looked at the two of them and smiled. "You two have succeeded as well. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.